Did everyone get a nice meal? Okay. All righty. So after a meal in the afternoon, it's not uncommon to get a little sleepy. So if I fall asleep up here, you wake me up, and if you fall asleep, I'll wake you up. Okay. All right. So we're going to finish up this morning's talk, and then we'll go into the developing brain right after we finish this. And so the question, we remember the 7 levels of moral decision making. Everybody remember this morning? We're going to do why Christ had to die, the atonement through the 7 levels. What's the first level of moral decision-making this morning? Reward and punishment, that's right. So why did Christ have to die? Reward and punishment, because God said don't do something, but they did it and responded with angry vengeance, taking the life of Jesus in our place. This is level 1. And that's known as the satisfaction theory of atonement. Level 2, because Satan now had rights to the earth and claimed the lives of the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve, and God struck a bargain with the devil and exchanged the life of Christ, for the life of humans, or Aslan had to give his life to the white witch in order to free the son of Adam. That's known as the ransom theory of atonement. Level 3, so that all will agree that God's government is fair in dealing with sin. That's known as the governmental theory of atonement. Level 4, law and order, to pay the legal penalty the law demanded and the heavenly judge imposed. The law must be kept. Man broke the law. Someone had to pay the penalty. Jesus paid the penalty. The integrity of the law was maintained. That is the penal substitution theory of atonement. Level 5, because he loved us too much to let us go, and his death was the means to reach us with his love and restore us to trust in him. That's known as the moral influence theory of atonement. Level 6, it was the only means to fix what sin had done to God's creation. When man sinned, they deviated from God's design for life, and their condition was changed to that of a terminal condition, dead in trespass and sin. Christ came to fix what sin did to this creation. Thus, he who knew no sin became sin for us, so that we might become the righteousness of God, 2 Corinthians 5:21. This is known as the Christus Victor, or the recapitulation theories, both of them, of atonement. And then level 7, understanding friend of God, Christ died to reveal the truth to win us to trust. Truth will set you free. Christ died to destroy death and bring life and immortality to light, 2 Timothy 1:10. By his death, he destroys him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, Satan, Hebrews 2:14, and restore humanity back to God's original design. It says in 1 John 3:8, by his death, he destroys the devil's work. And the devil has worked to efface the image of God in man and put Satan's image where God should be. Christ destroyed that work and restored God's image into the species human. And then ultimately, he secures the unfallen universe in its innocence. All things in heaven and earth are reconciled to Christ at the cross, Colossians 1:20. This is the healing reality that Christ had to accomplish in order to actually resolve the sin problem and eradicate it from hearts and minds and restore living creatures into the harmony of God's design. So level 7 understanding. The atonement is at one-ment with God. That's the original meaning of the English word atonement. The word at one, or taking two that are separate, bringing them back into unity. Having the law written on the heart, operating with the mind of Christ, partaking of the divine nature, being restored back to God's original design. Level 7 does what's right because it is right, and right doing is pleasing to God. You might have heard that quote somewhere. Yeah, that's level 7. Neither God nor his law, defined as his eternal principles, which he's based his government, change. Because God, when Adam sinned, God didn't change, nor did God's law change. Humankind was changed. And therefore, God has to fix humankind and put humankind back into harmony with him and his law. What changes as we mature is our understanding of God and his law changes, and the human species is changed to be in harmony with God. We understand at level 7 that God speaks to people at whatever level that they're operating at. Just like a parent who loves their children and they have 3-year-old, and they have a 10-year-old, and they have an 18-year-old, and they have a 25-year-old. The parent speaks differently to the children at different maturation levels, but the parent's goal is always for love and the development of their child. And so God speaks to people at different levels, and so you can find God speaking in different ways. It's a mistake, however, to stay stuck at a more immature level when a more mature level is available. When God gives better explanations as we grow and tries to lead us along, it would be a mistake to insist on the more immature level there. So with that in mind, I'm going to go back through those satisfaction and ransom and show you a level 7 understanding of these metaphors that were used by God. I gave you the common Christian way that they're often explained, but they're wrong. Here's the biblical way to understand those metaphors like satisfaction. This is the satisfaction, because there's language in Isaiah about for the satisfaction, okay? So how do we understand that? Well, sin put creation out of harmony with God, and God's loving beings are dying from this condition. They have a terminal condition. God is like a parent who has a child dying of leukemia. And parents in the room, if you have a child dying of leukemia, what is the only thing that will truly satisfy you? To see them healthy. So a remedy or a cure, right? Okay? So this is what it says. A remedy that heals, satisfies. And so it says in Isaiah 53, he will see the result of his suffering of his soul and be satisfied. He is satisfied because what Christ accomplished actually restores the species human to salvation. And that's why he's satisfied. And that's the proper understanding of satisfaction. It satisfies God's longing of his heart to save those he loves. Ransom theory. Ransom is the price required to free someone from bondage. That's what a ransom functionally does, yes? What holds us in bondage? Sin. Sin holds us in bondage, and sin has 2 elements that hold us in bondage. The lies about God that we believe and our own carnal natures. What is the price then that will free us? The truth about God that dispels the lies and wins us to trust, and a new nature. And that's the price. And that's the metaphor of the bread and the wine, or the flesh and the blood. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, Jesus said. The flesh or the bread, when you partake of literal bread, it gets broken down into molecules that become building blocks of your body. It's a metaphor for truth. Jesus is the Word made flesh. When we take in the words of truth, the life of Jesus revealed, those truths become building blocks of ideas and beliefs that dispel the lies and help build a construct of understanding that's healthier, that wins us to trust. And we open the heart, and he pours his love into our hearts. The life is in the blood. So we receive the life of Christ when we open and trust. We get a new heart and right spirit, which is the metaphor of the bread and wine. And so the price that frees us is the price of truth to win us back to trust, and the price of a new life that we can't develop, a sinless life that we receive from Christ, reproduced within us by the indwelling Spirit. And thus the ransom price is paid to you and me. Governmental theory. God rules on his design laws, love, truth, and liberty. And thus God can only heal minds, win us to love and truth, win us to love and trust through the truth presented in love, leaving free. Thus, liberty and love are sustained as the laws upon which God created life to operate upon, and it's the only basis for it. The penal substitution theory. This metaphor is not found in Scripture. It's completely based on Satan's lie, and there is no scriptural basis for it at all. It was created or made up by Martin Luther during the Reformation for the purpose of defanging or disempowering the Roman Church's mystical hold over people through the theory of purgatory. The Roman Church taught that sins have to be punished. Certain sins you have to have purged through either sacraments or penances. And if you don't fulfill those sacraments or penances before you die, then you go to a place of purgatory where you will have those sins purged before you are purified to go to heaven. And if you have loved ones being purged in purgatory, you can accelerate their purging and launch them into heaven if you give gold to the church. This is true. And their collectors, their collecting agency, would go around and they would say, whenever a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. Okay? And so Luther wanted to completely disavow that, and so he taught the idea of penal substitution theology, which is that all sins of all people of all time, past, present, and future, were put on Jesus at the cross and punished in Jesus on the cross, so all those who claim Jesus have all their sins for all time already paid for by the blood of Jesus, and there's no sins left unpaid for to be purged in purgatory. It is a completely human, contrived theology based on a false understanding of God's law being like human law, and that the sin problem is a legal problem needing legal payment and legal punishment. And so you won't find it in Scripture. God did add the Ten Commandments as a diagnostic tool. I would not know what sin was if it wasn't for the diagnostic efficacy of the law. Okay? The sin was added so that the law was added so that sin might abound, not so that we'd sin more, that we would see it more readily and easily understand it. Okay? And that was its purpose. But no salvation comes through the law any more than MRIs were created so that disease would abound. Okay? We can see the diseases more easily through the MRI than without the MRI. But the MRI does not cure any disease. Neither does the written law. It was given to expose it. And then we go to the physician, Jesus, who heals the damage in the heart and mind. Moral influence theory is accepted as part of the reality to heal. That's the truth about God, to win us to trust. But we understand it's incomplete. If you have a terminal condition, and there's a doctor who has a cure, but you don't trust the doctor, in fact, you think the doctor will hurt you if you go near him, then you will not benefit from the cure because you don't trust him. But if you have a doctor that you trust, but they have no cure, your trust in the doctor still won't get you well. Okay? So we have to have both. Jesus had to reveal the truth about God to win us back to trust, but Jesus also had to procure the actual remedy to the human sin condition to fix it, which was a perfect, sinless human character that he developed as a human being, which we never could develop. And it says in Hebrews 5:9, once he was made perfect, he became the source of salvation for all who will obey him. Made perfect, that is not sinless state. He was already sinless, always sinless. Made perfect is developing a righteous, sinless human character that he developed for us, and ultimately eliminated the aspects that tempt us with fear and selfishness. When he was tempted in every way, just like we are, yet without sin, he overcame with love. Christus Victor and recapitulation theory understand that Christ is victor over all opposition to his methods here on earth. He was tempted in the garden. He opposed and vanquished every opposition that Satan threw at him. Truth overcame lies. Love overcame selfishness. You see in Gethsemane, he was tempted with human emotions, not just external temptations from an external intelligence that was throwing lies at him. He actually had human emotions that tempted him. Anguish beyond what we can fully comprehend. And he did not give in to those temptations. He overcame those with love. And what were the temptations in Gethsemane? They were to act in what direction? Toward others or to save himself? So he was tempted with selfishness like we are, but he did not give in to selfishness. He overcame. No one can take my life. I give it freely. And thus love overcame selfishness in the person of Jesus Christ. So Jesus took up humanity, broken and damaged by Adam's sin, and he perfected humanity. He developed in his humanity what Adam was supposed to have developed in Eden, and he didn't. And then the healing reality not only accepts the moral influence truth that wins us to trust, not only accepts the victory of Christ over Satan and all the powers of the carnal aspects here on this earth, but also accepts and realizes that all things in heaven and on earth are reconciled to Christ at the cross, that there's a great controversy, and the intelligent angels that had never fallen needed the cross to secure them in their loyalty. So conflict in Christianity. Level 4 people, this is law and order, are anxious that the rules be kept. Level 4 people often end up in church administration because Level 4 thinkers are very, very focused on rules, structure, organization, definitions of words, defining what proper doctrines are, enforcing those doctrines, and so they gravitate toward administrative leadership position, and many church organizations are run by people who operate at level 4. There's a danger there, though, because they often resort to coercive methods, like compliance committees. You've probably never heard of compliance committees in the church, have you? You don't remember that just a few years ago, after 2015 General Conference? You all don't remember that. And the ordination of women question. And that they put in compliance committees at the General Conference to ensure that pastors complied and churches complied with the ruling. Level 6 and 7 persons who want to discuss principles were often called liberals by level 4 and below. Level 5, who seek to love other people and show compassion to the sinner, the drug addict, the homosexual, often seen as having loose standards by people who are at level 4 and below. Level 6 and 7 persons may be very bored with legalistic sermons about rule keeping or the fire and hell damnation threats of the level 1 thinker. Level 4 members will feel threatened when you ask questions that undermine the legal security or God as dictator. They won't use the term God as dictator. Do you know what the common Christian evangelical terminology for the dictator God is, though? The sovereignty of God. And when you hear that, you should ask, what do you mean by that? God is in control. And so you'll hear it come through like, well, that hurricane hit that city because God was punishing sin there. Or, oh, your granddaughter was killed in a car accident. Well, what sin did she have in her life that God was punishing her? Because God's sovereign, and he wouldn't have done that if she didn't deserve it. You've not heard this kind of stuff. Okay? This is a dictator God under the euphemism of the sovereignty. God, of course, is sovereign. We would never question that, but you have to understand his design laws. And one of his design laws that he governs by is the law of liberty. And then he gives us real freedom, and he sustains that liberty. And he does not encroach upon our liberties, even when we hurt ourselves with those liberties. Because love only exists in an atmosphere of freedom. Some are attracted to level 2, the health, wellness gospel. If you do the right rituals, obey the right rules, say the right prayers, then you will get wealthy and healthy. And if you have some sickness or poverty, it must be some sin in your life that has done it. Growth through the levels is stepwise, meaning you can't go from level 1 directly to level 7. It's developmental. Level 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 3, 3 goes to 4, 4 then goes to 5, and generally people can only understand one level operationally above the level they're currently operating. Okay? Only one level. That's why I frequently, by the level 4 penal substitution theologians, frequently, if you talk to any of them, you will hear an allegation, which is a false allegation, that I teach moral influence theory. That's level 5. I teach level 7, healing reality. But they're at level 4, and they really can't process above level 5. That's what they see. And it happens all the time. It must be 20 theologians or more over the years that have accused me of teaching moral influence theory. And I've had conversations with a number of them. They don't really process above level 5, moral influence theory. What is it that helps us grow? It's usually having some trial or tribulation in our life that doesn't fit our current understanding. And that's why the Bible says, rejoice in your trials, because they build character. They help us grow. It makes us search for deeper and better answers than the answers we currently have. What matters is function, not explanation. There are many people who function at level 5, loving others, but if you give them a Bible doctrines quiz, they were taught level 4, and they'll answer level 4, but that's not where they function. Their heart is the loving other people. And you can retain vestiges from one level to another. Law and order person can still demand vengeance. They just do it through legal channels. So they're still operating at some level 2 vestiges, wanting vengeance on their enemy, but now they want it through the punishment God can inflict because he can make them suffer more. I already said that. Most people in society actually operate at level 4 and below. It's estimated that 75% of people in the world operate at level 4 and below, and people who achieve level 5 and higher are ultimately persecuted by people who are operating at level 4 and below. Jesus, of course, was persecuted by the legalistic level 4 rule keepers of his day. Gandhi was operating clearly above the law and order and was persecuted by the people of his day. Martin Luther King Jr., read some of his writings, brilliant stuff. He was really operating at level 6 and 7. Yet he was also persecuted by the law and order people of his day. You will see this happening a lot. And then I mentioned Christ is the groom and coming back for his bride, but he's not coming back for a child bride. Okay, you can put up the other set now. We'll go into our developing brain. And if you have questions about that, once we do our next talk, we'll open it up to all the questions for this weekend. All right, developing brain. We're going to look at the brain. We're going to look at parental environmental influences, media influences, and spiritual influences. So the brain. The brain is made up of 100 billion neurons and has over, wow, that thing is just flying. Okay, it has over 1 trillion supporting cells. Each of the brain cells, the neurons, can have up to 10,000 connections to other neurons, which is 40 quadrillion interconnections, which is beyond any of our ability to really appreciate what that number means. But it's these interconnections that actually matter. They took a biopsy of Einstein's brain after his death, and per cubic centimeter, Einstein had less neurons per cubic centimeter than the average person. But he had significantly more neuron-to-neuron connections than the average person. And it's the connections between neurons that form information networks for information processing and deep thinking. And how do you develop those networks is through exercise, law of exertion. If you want something to get stronger, you must exercise it. And so exercising various neuronal pathways, whether it's music or math or language or art, as you exercise and do more of it, your brain expands and makes new connections and new pathways, and you get better at it with time. And this is really the critical thing. And this is where you're going to discover as we get into some of the other habit patterns, like I'm going to show you some data on television watching. When we get into the behaviors that children engage in, we're shaping their developing brain. Okay, we're shaping their brain, and then what we engage in later in life continues to shape and develop or prune back different pathways depending on what we engage in. But this is normal brain development. The brain is soft like a banana and a hard case, the skull, so it's vulnerable to rapid acceleration, deceleration injuries called concussions, which can damage the brain. It weighs about 3 pounds, which is 1 to 2% of the body weight, but it uses 20% of the body's energy. 1 to 2% of the body mass, using 20% of the body's energy. At least it's supposed to. It's supposed to be active. It's supposed to be using your brain. The human brain is so complex that even though it's only 1 to 2% of the body mass, 50% of the human genome codes for the brain. More than twice as many neurons are produced in fetal development than are eventually used in the brain. Twice as many neurons produced than are eventually used. You should already figure that means there must be a lot of pruning going on. That's right. During fetal development, there are times when 50,000 neurons are being produced per second. Per second. 50,000 neurons being produced per second at certain fetal developmental stages. You can imagine that during those days, high vulnerability to having brain problems if we interfere with that. Can you see that? Yeah. From birth to the first 8 years of life, the brain is busy going through reshaping and remodeling. A baby is born with millions of neurons more at birth than that child's brain will have by the time the child is 8 years of age. So the first 8 years of life, the brain is knocking off neurons by the millions. And I know some of you are thinking, but I needed those neurons. Okay? But the way you should conceptualize this is Michelangelo's block of marble when he gets it, and Michelangelo's block of marble when he's done with it. Now, when he's done with it, doesn't he have less marble? But he has a masterpiece. The brain comes into the world prepared to be acted upon by environment, education, life experiences. Neural circuits and pathways that are exercised will expand and grow stronger and recruit more neurons into the network. Neural circuits which are not being used will be pruned back and even deleted. This is normal brain development. That's why the first 8 years of life are so critical, because it really makes a very good foundational map or structure for later brain development and life experiences. There's a second wave of neurogenesis. Genesis means creation, neurons. So a second wave of new neurons that peak in girls at age 11 and boys at age 12, concentrating in the prefrontal cortex, and then more reshaping and remodeling of the neural network. And you can guess what this is for. By the age, this is puberty. Preparing for secondary sexual developmental characteristics and perspectives and relationships. The brain gives a new wave of neurogenesis, and life experience then will shape, to a great degree, arousal circuits, attraction circuits, gender identity circuits, and a whole bunch of things are shaped and influenced by life experiences and what we expose to. This is one of the reasons I have a real problem with some of the things happening politically in our country today, because children's brains are very pliable and very susceptible to influences that can corrupt them. And what's happening in our society is damaging on multiple layers to young people and their sense of identity. White matter maturation starts in the back of the brain and doesn't finish till the last part of the brain to be developed is the part behind your prefrontal cortex, the highest cortex, reasoning and worship and so forth and so on. This problem solving, strategizing, and it doesn't really finish developing until you're 25. 25 is when your prefrontal cortex really develops. And this is so many implications for major life decision making because of that. 18-year-olds fall in love in high school and get married at 18. And then when they're 26, they look at each other and go, what was I thinking? Well, their brain was an adolescent brain, now it's an adult brain, and many things can change in that period of time. What they value, unless the two walk a path of Christ-like maturity and growing together in godliness, that can make the outcome okay. Without that, if it's just the world going, they can often look at each other at around 25, 26 and go, what was I thinking? Because I'm not attracted to you at all anymore. And in fact, they have very little in common oftentimes, because they've grown up and they've walked different paths. So parental influence, parents influence both environmentally and genetically. I want you to look at these two mice. I'm going to come back to them later. I'm going to ask you the question, how closely related? Are these just two members of the same species? Are these siblings from the same litter? Are they parent-child? How closely related do you think those two mice are? We're going to come back to those. So parents influence through the genes they pass down and through the environment in which the child is raised. Have you heard the term epigenetics? Epi means above. Genetics means the genome or the data information stored in your DNA. In 1957, Conrad Waddington hypothesized that there must be a set of instructions sitting above the DNA. He made this hypothesis because in your body, every cell of your body has the same DNA. Your skin cells, your neurons, your bone cells, your retinal cells, they all have the same DNA, yet those cells don't look anything alike. They're all different. And so he hypothesized there must be some instructions sitting above the actual genome telling which genes to turn on and which genes to turn off in order for the cells to be different. And he termed that epigenetics. And we've now documented that, in fact, it's true. Not only do you inherit from your parents the sequences of information that that are coded in your DNA, you inherit a set of molecules that are attached to the DNA telling the DNA how to open and how to close, which chapters to open, which chapters to close. They pass along transgenerationally. We also gestationally, during pregnancy, what a mother experiences will alter the fetal genetic expression, how genes are turned off and on, and then childhood and life experiences for all of us alter our gene expression. I'm going to give you some examples of that. This is simply showing you graphically, since the laser pointers don't work on a screen like this. On the far left, it looks like an X. That's a chromosome. And you see a string coming off the chromosome. That is unwinding all the way till it looks like a little two strings kind of wound around each other. Those would be two strands of DNA. And how DNA is stored is they have complementary strands, like a zipper, okay? And in order to get the information, the zipper has to unzip, so whatever the coded information, little teeth on the zipper would be like letters in an alphabet. And if you put the letters together in an alphabet, you can make words, and you can make chapters, and you can write information. And that's what's coded inside those strings of molecules. And those things are zipped together, wrapped around chromatin, packed together, wrapped around histones, packed into chromatin, and packed into chromosomes. So to get the information out, you have to unpack, unwind, and unzip, okay, in order to get the information. And anywhere along that way, see there's on the bottom left-hand picture, there's these little tiny yellow dots kind of attached. You see those? It says Me. Those are graphically representing a molecule called a methyl group. It's just a molecule, methyl group. But when it attaches to a DNA, what that functionally would be like getting the shirt tail caught in your zipper. You ever got a shirt tail caught in your zipper? You can't unzip the zipper now, can you? It's stuck. These methyl groups, when they bind to a DNA region, they lock it down. It can't unzip. That information is not accessible. That gene is no longer coding, so it locks it down. Removing methyl groups makes the gene more accessible, so it can be expressed more easily. And that's going to be a theme we come back to, because life experiences, and that's one mechanism of altering gene expression, attaching or removing methyl groups to the DNA. Fruit flies were exposed to an antibiotic called geldenomycin, and the fruit flies who were exposed to it had these large bulging outgrowths on their eyes. And then they let the fruit flies reproduce, and they followed them for 13 generations, and 13 generations had these bulging outgrowths on their eyes, but there was no DNA sequencing change, meaning there was no mutation to the DNA. What happened was there was an expression change in the DNA, and that passed down the 13 generations, even though only the first generation was exposed to the antibiotic. Roundworms were fed a particular type of bacteria which caused them to lose a fluorescent green protein and become dumpy in appearance. That passed down 40 generations. There was no mutation to the DNA sequence, and the subsequent generations were not fed the bacteria. This was an epigenetic change altering how the genes were being expressed from the one generation ingesting something, altering 40 generations later. So grandfathers who were exposed to famine-like conditions in their adolescence conferred greater risks to their grandsons of dying young. And grandmothers conferred the greater risk on their granddaughters of dying at a young age if they had a famine-like condition in their adolescence. And this was tracked back to a XY transgenerational epigenetic change in gene expression. So during World War II, famine conditions, adolescents don't get a lot of food, they're starving to death, and down the road, their grandkids are going to die younger because of that. Men who smoked before the age of 11 increased obesity in their sons, but not their daughters, because the smoking altered a gene on their Y chromosome that they passed on to their sons. Smell of fear. They took the first generation F0 mice and they conditioned them to be afraid of a certain smell. Smell was something called acetophenone. And in the mice olfactory bulb, there's a gene that codes for a receptor that reacts only to this smell. And every time they exposed them to this smell, they would do a loud bang, so that the mouse became conditioned to be afraid of the smell. It would make them afraid. Okay? And then what was interesting is their children and grandchildren, generation F2 and F1 and F2, had hypo, meaning less, like hypotension, or hypoglycemia means low, hypomethylation, low methyl groups on that gene. So if you take away the methyl groups, remember that's the shirt tail and a zipper, that gene is going to express more. So their children and grandchildren had olfactory bulbs with more receptors that were sensitive to this smell, and they were afraid of the smell and avoided it, even though they were never startled when the smell was there. Isn't that interesting? Form of genetic memory, perhaps. Gestational factors. Smoking while pregnant. Babies who are born to mothers who smoke while pregnant will be smaller than other babies. They'll have increased risk of sudden infant death syndrome. They will have more learning. They will have increased psychotic disorders later in life. What about air quality? Mom doesn't smoke, but she lives in a city where there's pollution. Hydrocarbons that are high concentration. Study of 40 women and children followed for 7 to 9 years found there's a dose-dependent relationship between the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, that's fossil fuels that are being burned and put into the atmosphere, exposure, and white matter in the left hemisphere. So basically, if mom had a high pollution environment while she was pregnant, her children would be born with less white matter in the prefrontal cortex, causing them to have more ADHD-like and information processing problems. Too much information? No? What about alcohol in pregnancy? If a mother drinks while she's pregnant, their children have increased risk of psychotic disorders later in life. But here's one, epigenetically. If mom drank alcohol while she was pregnant with you, it would have made an epigenetic change in the genes that code for taste, such that if you get exposed to alcohol, it would actually taste better to you than had mom not drank while she was pregnant with you. Increased risk of mental retardation, multiple organ defects, if she drinks heavily, fetal alcohol syndrome. But what about if mom drinks just 1 glass of wine a week or less? She doesn't even get drunk, just 1 glass of wine a week or less. That's very small, right? That's not going to have an effect, is it? Well, actually, that little bit of alcohol results in children that are born smaller, they're shorter and smaller, with smaller heads. They have more behavior problems later in life. They have more delinquency later in life, and they have more emotional problems later in life than if mother did not use any alcohol during pregnancy. What about cannabis, aka marijuana, while pregnant? Well, you may know that there's been a push over the last couple of decades to make marijuana legal in many states. Is it legal in Ohio? It is legal in Ohio? Do you have dispensaries you can go buy it? I'm not talking CBD oil. No, so it's not like Colorado. Okay, all right. Or Oregon or California. Okay? Well, 16% of pregnant women, this was 2016 data. Probably from COVID, it's higher because we saw drug use and alcohol use went up during COVID across the board. But from 2016 data, 16% of pregnant women use some type of drugs during pregnancy. The number 1 drug of choice during pregnancy was cannabis. 16%, so a little less than 1 in 5. As 2009 to 2016, the rate doubled in pregnancy use, doubled in those 7-year period. In Colorado, 70% of the marijuana dispensaries recommended cannabis to pregnant women for morning sickness, and 36% of the dispensaries reassured the women that it was perfectly safe in pregnancy. Marijuana or cannabis crosses the placental barrier, altering the fetal brain development. It's secreted in breast milk up to a week after use. It causes anemia in the mother. Mothers who smoke, the newborns that have lower birth weight, increased risk of preterm delivery, more stillbirths, and higher NICU admissions and neonatal ICU admissions than babies born to mothers who did not smoke marijuana. Increased rates of impulsivity in the children, more delinquency, more learning problems, more psychotic disorders, and impaired executive function, ability to attend, focus, concentrate if mother smoked marijuana when she was pregnant. Also, it doubles the rate of autism if mother smokes marijuana in the offspring. Mothers themselves experience more anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, and if they are vulnerable, family histories of mania and psychosis, it increases the rates of mania and psychosis and increases the use of other illegal substances and alcohol. So there is no medically beneficial use of marijuana. I can just tell you that for pregnancy, for sure. Okay? The only places it could be used medicinally would be probably in some very rare circumstances, such as cancer with intractable nausea and things like that. There might be some places it could be used medicinally. But there is no behavioral medicinal use for it. There is no brain benefit from this, even though it's common across the nation that marijuana is prescribed for various mental health disorders. It is true that there's data emerging that people who smoke marijuana use opioids less. So because people who use marijuana have reduced opioid consumption, this is being argued as a really good reason to use marijuana, so you won't use opioids. Mother's thinking while pregnant. Will that affect the child if the mother's thought patterns? Well, a study of 4,000 mothers and their children followed for 18 years found that if mother had a negative, depressogenic, pessimistic thinking patterns, negative, always down, griping, unhappy during pregnancy, that increased her child's risk of having major depressive disorder 18 years later. And this association remained after accounting for both maternal and offspring depression. So just mother's negative thinking patterns had a negative effect on the developing brain of the child. They said it was a 21% increased risk for if she thought negatively during pregnancy. What if the mother's highly stressed during pregnancy? Now, this may not be anything to do with mother's negative thought patterns. Think about a young 19-year-old lady who is married and her husband gets drafted in the military and sent into a combat zone. Will she have stress during her pregnancy? Think about any young lady who's pregnant and her mother is diagnosed with aggressive terminal cancer and dies during her pregnancy. Will she have stress during her pregnancy? This may have nothing to do with negative thought patterns. Stress happens, right? Okay? But if the mother's highly stressed during pregnancy, her stress hormones elevate. Those stress hormones cross the placental barrier, cross the developing blood-brain barrier, and alter the fetal braking system on the child's stress circuitry. And so the newborn babe is born with a brain that is less capable of calming or breaking anxiety and stress firing. So they're born more irritable, more anxious, and more socially impaired than they would have been otherwise had mom not been highly stressed during pregnancy. It makes them more vulnerable to mental illnesses, anxiety disorders, depressions, and so forth later down the road. Now, we're going to look at the diet of mom. Does diet have any impact on the developing brain? So back to these two mice. How closely related are they? That's right. They're identical twins, or they're clones. They're identical. Do they look identical to you? No, these are clones. They have a single gene that the single gene is turned on in one and turned off in another, and that gene is called the agouti gene. When the agouti gene is turned on, the mouse is obese, diabetic with blonde fur. When the gene is turned off, the mouse is thin, non-diabetic with brown fur. On the far left, it's turned on. On the far right, it's turned off. And in between, there's what's called partial penetrance. Some of the cells in the body have it turned on and some have it turned off. You can see the speckled pattern of some brown fur and some blonde fur. Well, what turns on the agouti gene? Bisphenol A will turn this on. Bisphenol A is a byproduct of plastics. Okay, and I've got cans on there because all cans are lined with plastic. There's a plastic lining inside of a can to prevent whatever's in the can from corroding the metal in the can. So bisphenol A. Well, what turns off the agouti gene? Methylation. Those methyl groups attaching to the agouti gene, zipper in the shirt tail, locks it down, it won't be expressed. And so they took a group of these blonde, diabetic, obese mice, and during their pregnancy, they fed them a diet that was supplemented with vitamin B12 and folic acid. Vitamin B12 and folic acid are methyl donors. They give lots of methyl groups away. And then they saw the offspring were born thin, brown-furred, non-diabetic. And then they let the children reproduce, but they did not supplement the brown-furred, thin children. They did not supplement their diet with folic acid and vitamin B12, and their children were also born brown, non-diabetic, and thin, and their children's children. And so the healthy diet of the mother passed down 3 and 4 generations with the agouti gene suppressed, and on 3 and 4 generations down, the children were still being born with brown fur, thin, non-diabetic. Agouti gene turned off. Is anything triggering in your mind about things passing down 3 and 4 generations? This is exactly right. The choices we make alter our gene expression. We pass along those choices down to our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. A lot of times you hear kids say, well, it's my body, I can do with what I want. Only if you're not planning on having kids. If you're planning on having kids, it's not just your body, it's your kids' bodies, your grandkids' bodies, and your great-grandkids' bodies you're messing with. That's pretty profound, isn't it? This also gives you insight into Jacob and his sheep. Do you remember the story in Genesis where Jacob thing where he took and peeled the bark back on some of these trees, these poplar trees, and these other trees, and put them in the water, and then had them drink out of the water, and all the ones that were speckled and spotted or striped that he got, and all the plain ones his father-in-law got? You remember? They've actually done the research on this, and those particular trees have a molecule in them that if the sheep and the goats drink out of it will cause the agouti gene to be expressed randomly, and they will have speckled and spotted fur. He'll get more that way. Isn't that fascinating? See, the Bible's true all along, just telling you guys. All right, what about gestational effect on food supply? During the Netherlands, during World War II, there was a severe food shortage. The women pregnant women were getting an average caloric intake of 500 calories a day during pregnancy. You understand it's very, very severe, low food shortage, okay? And what happened is the children born during the food shortage to the same biologic mother and father as their siblings. So there's one child's born during the food shortage, and then they have brothers and sisters from the same parents. They're followed later in life, and what they found is the ones born during the food shortage had later in life higher rates of diabetes, obesity, metabolic problems like adult onset diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, and those things than the siblings from the same parents. Why? Well, they actually researched the families, and they found out that a specific gene, you don't need to know the name of the gene, had 5% less methyl groups attached to it. If you remove methyl groups, you increase the expression of the gene. And this particular gene allows the body to pull energy out of food. So basically, during famine times, there's a fetus developing, there's a signal going down, we're in a famine. There's hardly any nutrition out here at all. You're only getting 500 calories a day to mama right now. We're going to remove some methyl groups from this particular gene, so when you're born into the world, you won't need as much food to survive. And then the war's over. You get normal food, you eat the same as everybody else, and you end up obese and diabetic. Because your genes are expressed differently. And then environmental factors. I talked about the normal fetal development and how the brain is being shaped during fetal development. And then early childhood development also will impact how the brain is shaped. This is a study of animals. Pups who were raised by nurturing mothers who would lick and groom them regularly were compared to pups who were raised by neglect mothers. And they discovered that the pups without attentive mothers, the ones with the neglect mothers, had altered brain development such that they had more active fear circuits, they were less socially engaged, and had more anxiety than the pups raised by the attentive mothers. Well, they thought, well, I wonder if this is really due to the environment, or is this simply something genetic, and that's why the neglect mothers are neglecting because they have the same gene defect, and we're just seeing that same problem. And so they took the pups born of the neglect moms and put them in with the attentive moms who licked and groomed them, and they followed the brain development, and brain development was normal. So this was not genetic, it was environmental. And so after the child is born into the world, holding, touching, healthy affection, love, kissing, facial expression, okay, understand how harmful it is to developing brains to hide faces from them. It actually harms them, raises anxiety, impairs language, impairs social learning. One study I saw came out that it reduced IQ by about 12 points because of the importance of all normal neural development. We are created as social beings. It's very healthy. Oh, that thing advanced on me, didn't it? A couple times. See where we are. Yeah, okay. So I showed you a lot of negative. Let's give you a positive one. This is a group of mice that were cloned to have a specific gene defect that made them stupid. Meaning that they didn't learn, they didn't remember. They had a harder time learning than normal mice. And then they took these mice with this gene defect, and they randomized them in two groups. One just had a regular old cage, and another group had what is called an enriched environment. That is a picture of a mouse-enriched environment. They put lots of toys and playthings and smells and stuff for them to experience. Remember, these mice are cloned, two groups. And they allowed them to have this 2 weeks in their adolescence of an enriched environment. And those same cloned mice with the same gene defect who had the enriched environment actually ended up with better memory. They could run through these trails and remember their way through significantly better than their cloned counterparts who did not have the enriched environment. And then they allowed, and that's not too surprising, exercise, experience, change your brain. You learn something they didn't have, so we learned something. But then they let them both produce. And the children, the offspring of the ones with the enriched environment, were born with the gene defect shut down. They had the gene defect, but it was shut down. And so even though they had the gene defect, they were born with better memory because of the positive experience of their parents. Isn't that fascinating? So what are protective factors? Family member confidence. Children raised in a home in which they have somebody they can go and confide in. They can talk about their fears. They can talk about being teased at school. They can talk about how they made a mistake and they stuck their tongue out at somebody at school and got laughed at or whatever. They can have somebody they can confide in without fear and talk out their issues. That is very adaptive and very healthy for a developing brain. And also something called family cohesion. Family cohesion is our family sticks together. We watch each other's back. We don't rat each other out. We don't embarrass each other. We cover each other. We're each other's friends. That dynamic, that you have a family that cares for you and has got your back, and a family member confident you can confide in, significantly develops the brain with less fear and less anxiety and much better coping strategies. Other environmental factors, tobacco, alcohol, marijuana. This is not gestationally now. This is environment in the child growing up. So children who smoke, nicotine binds to receptors that regulate neural development, and thus kids who smoke, teens who smoke have higher rates of psychotic disorders, anxiety problems, depression problems, medical problems, and have a more difficult time quitting later, because if you start smoking in adolescence, you actually have a greater physiological addiction to the nicotine than if you start smoking after the age of 20. And this is one of the reasons why Joe Campbell and the organizations targeted adolescent smokers, because they get lifelong smokers that way, can never really get free of it. This is simply talking about how alcohol will alter gene expression. And so the acute effect of drinking alcohol is the alcohol itself causes the membranes of your neurons to be stiff. And the stiffening of the membranes physically pulls open ion channels that cause, and for the doctor in the room, causes chloride to run inside the neurons, which causes the neurons to become hyperpolarized, sedate, and that's why you become, if you drink so much, you'll pass out, you become lethargic, you become stuporous, because your neurons are becoming sedate from the acute effect. That's the acute effect, drinking right now. It also, though, epigenetically alters a gene which begins producing a protein that was not in your brain before you drank, and that protein will react upon your anxiety circuits, so once the acute effects are gone, this protein now makes you feel a little more anxious than you would have felt at baseline before you drank. And it takes about 6 to 8 weeks for that protein to clear. And so this is a reinforcing mechanism that people who drink will relax, because it relaxes them and helps them drink. And then when it clears, they actually have more anxiety because of the Y peptide or protein that's being produced. And they have to have some period of sobriety before the brain will clear that, and they can at least get down to whatever their baseline levels of anxiety are. Marijuana increases risk of psychotic disorders up to 40%. The people vulnerable for psychosis will have marked increase in psychotic symptoms if they smoke marijuana. Damages white matter tracts, impairs prefrontal cortex, focus, thinking, initiative, motivation. Lowers IQ for those who smoke before the age of 18. And this has been studied in multiple different studies, that if you smoke marijuana before the age of 18, it's a dose-dependent thing. The more you smoke, the bigger the damage. But you lose IQ points that never recover. It's quite profound. It's quite profound. Let's see. Media influences. 7 studies have confirmed that children who watch any type of media, TV, any type of media before the age of 2 have delayed language development. All the academies, American Academy of Psychiatry, Neurology, American Academy of Pediatrics, all of them recommend no screen time for kids under the age of 2. It delays language development. No studies show that TV has any benefit at all before the age of 2. Now, what is the impact of television? Remember one of the laws I told you, the law of exertion. If you exercise something, it gets stronger. If you don't use it, you lose it. Okay? And then normal brain development, first 7-8 years of life, major remodeling and reshaping of the brain. So certain activities during those years will have a bigger impact on shaping the brain than later in life, but still will do it later in life, exercising. You start playing the piano now, you will build new pathways. You start doing it those first few years of life, it makes them faster. Okay? So impact on television watching activates your emotion circuits. That's what it does. Theatrical television. We're talking theatrical television. We're not talking, watching educational videos, okay? No, theatrical television, its goal is to make you emotional in some way while simultaneously suspending activity in your prefrontal cortex. That's what it does. Activates mood circuits, suspends activity in prefrontal cortex circuits. Think about any theatrical program you watch, your favorite shows. They want to get you to laugh. They want to get you to cry. They want to get you frightened. They want to get you stressed and anxious. They want to get you on the edge of your seat. They want to get an emotional reaction, but they don't want you actually thinking. Because if you actually think, for almost every program you watch, if you start thinking, you go, this is stupid. Hardly any show has any real depiction to objective reality. There's very, very few programs that I can tolerate watching, and my friends and family often don't like me in the room when they're watching because I begin pointing out stuff to them. Like, are you kidding me? The classics. It's any type of a police show. I don't care which police show you watch. You can bank money on it that sometime in that show they're going to have a chase scene. And they're going to set the chase scene up because they're after this person who is the most nefarious criminal, probably has a nuclear bomb, is going to destroy the whole world. They see him, and he doesn't see them. And he's across the street in heavy traffic. And instead of quietly going up and grabbing him, they holler at him across the street in traffic. Hey, stop! Wait till we get over there. Come on, people. Come on. They do it every time so they can have a chase scene and get you on the edge of your seat. Okay? And then if you watch the actual chase scenes, you'll have some perp who is 360 pounds running up some stairs, or maybe the police officer's that, and the police officer's 300 pounds, and he's chasing the perp who's an 18-year-old football player, okay? But he catches him somehow. You see that, right? It's great, crazy. Or if you watch as they change scenes, they'll have maybe go either way, 10 yards between them, and the very next scene around the corner, it's 200 yards between them. Somehow, like this, or the opposite way, they're like this. If you just watch, it's like, this isn't real. And you're right, it's not. It's designed, and I will say this to my friends as they're watching, they'll say, you're not supposed to think about it or analyze it. That's right. You're not supposed to think about it, which means you're supposed to suspend prefrontal cortex activity. Law of exertion. If you're not using it, you're losing it. And so what happens with theatrical television watching, it overactivates emotion circuits, underdevelops prefrontal cortex circuits, which we're to process our emotions and self-restrain and calm ourselves. So kids who are raised in a lot of theatrical entertainment end up hitting adolescence when the hormones hit, and they're overly emotional, moody, irritable, impulsive, and they don't have a good prefrontal cortex that can calm themselves, and so they end up acting out aggressively, sexually, or looking for chemicals to calm themselves because they can't calm themselves. This is what happens. It structurally changes the brain. first study that looked at this really, and is the seminal study, and it's been repeated in multiple studies, and outcomes are the same, was a guy named Centerwall. And he wanted to see if theatrical television had any impact on violence in society. And he used three measures, three societies. He used the United States, South Africa, and Canada. The United States and Canada had television come into our societies in 1945. South Africa had no television in the nation at all until 1974. He used a black and white indicator of violence in society, which is homicide rates. And in South Africa, he looked at white-on-white only homicide to take out any apartheid issues which could confuse things. And he included Canada because Canada has very strict gun control laws, and if there was an uptick in homicides, he didn't want people to say, well, it's because you got guns everywhere in America. And so this is what he found. From 1945 to 1974, homicide rates in the United States went up 93%. In Canada, they went up 92%. In South Africa, white-on-white only, dropped 7% during those same years. And then here's the kicker. He looked at homicide rates from 1974 to 1980 after television was introduced into South Africa. And what did he find? Homicide rates in South Africa jumped 130%. White on white only. White on white only. Now, a lot of people will say, well, bad violent content in, bad violent content out. Okay? What was the television programming on in the United States before 1974? Name some shows. Andy Griffith, I Love Lucy. He named the two violent ones. It's interesting. The pastor named the two violent ones. First thing. I just want you to know that. Two violent ones. I'm going to tell you what they are, but he named them both. Okay? Pastor, I'm going to have to counsel with you. Okay? Leave It to Beaver. Howdy Doody. Okay? But the two he named, Gunsmoke and Bonanza. Now, Gunsmoke and Bonanza get what kind of a rating? If they rate them on the parental rating scale, what rating do they get? G. They're G-rated. G-rated programming. Everything before 74 would be rated by today's standards, G-rated. G-rated programming gives you a 92 and 93% increase in homicide rates, G-rated programming. Because it's not about the programming itself, it is about the neurobiological effect of theatrical entertainment, which activates emotion circuits and suspends prefrontal cortex circuits. That's what it does. Now, if you get more violent content, which got worse after 74, then you'll magnify the effect. But the primary effect is neurobiological first, and then the quality of the entertainment second. And then this is a different study looking at the same dynamic. They were looking at attention, and Zimmerman and his group in 2007 looked at violent theatrical television programming, nonviolent theatrical programming, which would be G-rated programming, and then educational programming, like the lectures you would get on our videos and so forth, okay, what you guys broadcast out of here. And they looked at measures of attention and concentration and focus. And what they found is that both theatrical programmings, R-rated, G-rated, didn't matter, impaired attention and focus. Educational programming did not. It's not primarily the content. It is whether it's suspending activity in prefrontal cortex and activating emotion circuits, or it's engaging your thinking and teaching you something. It's the law of exertion in play. That's what's really happening. So exposure to media, television, predicts fear of terrorism. The more television kids watch, the more fear of terrorism they have. Does that surprise anybody? I would tell you today, I haven't seen the study, this was done before that, but I would predict to you, the more television watching they watch, the more fear of infections they have now. Why? Because they're actually more at risk of infections now than they were before COVID? Or they have been programmed to become fearful of something that is no more risk, and you all know that children were never at serious risk of COVID, ever. You know that, right? Seasonal flu was multiple times more dangerous to children than COVID-19 ever was, and still is. They were never at risk. And children are more at risk of the COVID vaccine than they are of the disease. But we won't go into that. We're going into the fact that many of them are afraid today, not because of the objective risk, but because of what they're being told and what they're being programmed with. Social media posts focus on fear and negative sentiments 51% of the time, and misleading information 60% of the time. And this was, again, before COVID. Aren't you glad we're having an information czar sent up that's going to filter our information and have a truth czar to tell you what's true and not true? You won't ever have to think again. Okay, let's see. Spiritual factors. I mentioned this morning. I'll mention it again because it's true. Newberg and his group studied individuals meditating on the God of love 12 minutes a day for 30 days, and they could measure growth in the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. Had lower heart rates and blood pressures because when your love circuit's active, your fear circuit's calm, and they had 30% improvement in memory testing in 30 days. Only God of love had these benefits. Angry God, punishing God, distant God did not have these benefits. And that's neurobiologically true. Love calms the stress circuitry, which results in physiological better health. And we talked about the altruism this morning. So, but how is it that the healthy spirituality, which is a love-based spirituality, it reduces risk for mental illness? Because it activates prefrontal cortex, truth and love, prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex activate. That calms the fear circuitry, which lowers inflammatory factors in your body that I went through this morning. And lowered inflammatory factors results in improved physiological health across the board. Additionally, altruistic activities result in better mental and physical health. It was mentioned in our offering this morning, and that's been shown in multiple studies to be true. It tends to, people with healthy spirituality have a God they can trust, and thus they tend not to worry about things that are not theirs. They turn things over into God's hand, their future, how things will turn out. That's not mine. Mine is to carry out my duties to the best of my ability and trust God with how it turns out. Healthy spirituality tend to worry about trying to control things that are not theirs less than people who don't have a healthy spirituality. They tend to have healthier lifestyles because they want to protect the spirit temple, so they won't abuse their physiology like people with an unhealthy spirituality. So they have reduced oxidative stress. They tend to have healthier relationships because they're more willing to forgive and set healthy boundaries than people who have an unhealthy spirituality. So healthy spirituality is physiologically and mentally healthy across the board. So, in summary, the brain is highly complex, susceptible to change. Environment causes marked changes in brain development and alters gene expressions which pass down through the generations. And now it's time to do questions. Yeah. So, if you have a question, raise your hand because, and is there a bottle of water somewhere? Somebody could grab me one? Thanks. And if raise your hand, they want to get this on the mic for who the people are listening online. You want that one? Yeah, there you go. So just raise your hand and back to your right there. Yeah. Yeah. No, not working. Switch it on.
Since the theatrical television can negatively affect you, I'm guessing that all these video games that kids are constantly playing would have the same effect?
No.
Oh, okay.
That was a
Glad
guess. You were guessing. Okay. Nothing wrong with the hypothesis. No, they don't have the same effect at all. They have an effect, but they're a different effect. So they have an effect, but it's different. Gaming requires actual planning, strategizing, organizing, coordinating, intention, a lot of prefrontal cortex activity in gaming. And so depending on what the game, so whereas the medium of television, the content really doesn't matter, it's the mechanism, where the gaming, it's the content that matters. The mechanisms can actually be very adaptive. You can learn a lot of strategies, planning, organization, develop prefrontal cortex, strategic, depending on what game you're actually playing. So the game quality makes a difference. And the problem with the gaming is they can condition you to reinforce things in a positive way that God has designed you to be reluctant to do. We are wired to have a hesitancy to actually kill another human being. It's actually hard to do that. There's a reluctance to do it. It's wired in. But if you're a soldier in combat, the command, the organization, the army doesn't want their soldiers to hesitate when they need to kill, and so they developed a game, which is the #1 game of all time still, as far as I know. It's called Call of Duty, And Call of Duty is designed to decondition your reluctance and to reward you for killing. But fortunately, they only get rewards for killing the enemy. You don't get rewards for killing the civilians, at least. That's good. Some games do that, which is even worse. But so video gaming can have an impact. It can potentially be beneficial depending on how it's used and what it's used for.
So follow-up, since you mentioned Call of Duty. Wouldn't that have an increase in our violence in society? Because now you have all of these children who are programmed to not feel when they want to kill someone. Oh, I don't like what you're doing? Okay, I'm going to kill you. I mean, they hunt people down.
Television watching would be more likely to result in that than the video gaming.
Oh, okay.
It depends on the video gaming. Again, the Call of Duty was designed to help a person have discrimination where they would kill people identified as enemies. So if you then can teach a bunch of kids, raise them on Call of Duty, and then teach them through your media that everybody with a certain skin color is your enemy, then you might get more violence against that because they're being conditioned to kill their enemies, okay? But not to kill people who are not their enemies. This is Call of Duty, to have some discrimination there. Television watching, though, causes people to have aggression and violence without any impulse control at all. And so it's in many ways more dangerous.
Wow.
Okay? So, but some of the gaming are indiscriminate. Some of the gaming is all about getting points for killing prostitutes or running them over with your car, killing anybody that you want to kill, you get points for. And that would be very, very negative on the developing ego and sense of self and brain. Yes.
Right. Wow. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Nick?
Yeah, up in the balcony and then down here. Go ahead.
Hello. I said about the theology that you said in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's about the penal substitution
Sure.
theory.
Yeah. Yep.
It might take long. You like to reason, but I want to make sure I understood what you said. You say that it's not biblical to believe that Christ took our sin and paid for them?
So I didn't use that language. I said penal
No,
substitution.
I'm just saying that's what I understood the
Right.
way you
So I
presented.
said that penal substitution theology as an atonement model is not in the Bible. Okay? So the language you just used, say Christ took our sin, I didn't actually use that language. I believe that he who knew no sin became sin for us, as it says in 2 Corinthians 5:21. So he is our substitute, took sin upon himself, but what was for the purpose? The text tells us, so that we might become the righteousness of God. So yes, I believe in substitutionary atonement, but not penal substitutionary atonement. I believe in healing substitutionary atonement, that he who knew no sin became sin for us so that we might become the righteousness of God. And that's what the Bible teaches. The penal idea that you have a legal problem with a legal heavenly magistrate who is the source of death that he will use his power to kill you for, and we need someone to go between him and us to pay him so he won't kill us, that's pagan. That is not Christian. But that is the common view taught in Christianity under the penal substitution model.
No, but you believe that he paid for my sins?
So who did he pay?
Christ.
Christ is the one who paid, but who did Christ pay?
God's justice.
So he paid God. So God needed to be paid. And if God didn't get paid, then what would God do to us if he doesn't get the payment?
No, but I mean in the
So,
judgment.
no, let's follow it through. Jesus died to pay for my sin. You just said he paid it to God. If God doesn't get the payment, what will God do to us?
Kill us.
That's pagan. That's not Christian. In
No, I
that
think
model that you just described, God is the source of death inflicted upon us, and God requires something done to God to keep God from killing us. That's pagan. That's not Christian. God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son. God was in the Son reconciling the world to himself. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The Father and I are one. The biblical model is that when Adam sinned in Eden, human condition changed from harmony with God to sinfulness, dead in trespass and sin. This condition, without God's intervention, results in ruin and death. Death does not come out from God. Death comes out from sin. Sin, when full grown, brings forth death, James chapter 1. The penal model, though, has death coming out from God. God is the source of death, and he kills you. This is pagan. This is Satan's view of God. And it stems in how we understand law. If our view of law is that God's law functions no different than the kind of law we make up, rules that require enforcement, then God is the ultimate enforcer who enforces his law by punishing lawbreakers, and that minimum punishment is death. Somebody had to pay the penalty. Jesus came, took the penalty, was punished by God, killed by God. And if we accept that payment, God gives us a checkbook in our record in heaven, and he won't have to kill us. That's pagan. It's not Christian.
But my question is then, how will I be acquitted in judgment because of my sins?
How are we acquitted?
Yes. How will I be declared?
What do you mean by acquitted?
I mean, I'm guilty before God because I broke his law.
Oh, so, okay, so when, I love this conversation. I want to thank you, and I don't want you to feel picked on by me at all. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm picking on you, because this is a wonderful conversation, and you are asking questions that many people have, so thank you for that. When you use terms like acquitted, they have certain meaning. What was it you said when I asked about the acquitted? Oh, guilty before God. Because you're a sinner. When did you choose to become a sinner?
When I knew it was good and I did not do it.
When did you choose to become a sinner? So there was a time in your life when you were sinless.
No.
I know. So because you say you're guilty before God because you have sinned, that is the human law model based on human construct. Go to the design law model. When Adam and Eve sinned, they changed themselves. God had already given them an ability. That ability is called procreation, the ability to produce beings in their own image. They are now sinful or driven by fear and self-centeredness rather than love and trust. And we are born, Psalms 51:5, born in sin, conceived in iniquity. We're born with a condition that we did not choose, that is out of harmony with God. We're not born guilty. We're born terminal. So imagine, HIV-infected man, HIV-infected woman, have a baby, get together, have a baby, born HIV-infected. What did the baby do wrong? Nothing. But does the baby have a condition which, without remedy, will result in symptoms and eventual death? We are born in sin, conceived in iniquity. We didn't choose it. We're not born guilty. We're born terminal, dead in trespass and sin. That condition, without remedy, results in symptoms. What are those symptoms called? Sins. The sins are the symptoms of the condition which we were born. And we require to be reborn with a new heart and right spirit that we can't make. We receive as a gift from our substitute who became sin for us, though he knew no sin, so that we might become righteous. We might be reborn in righteousness.
The only thing, I was not born a sinner.
You were not born a sinner?
No.
So you were born righteous. You were born holy. You were born like Adam and Eve in Eden.
No, I was not born either way. I mean, when I sin, then I become a sinner. When I was born,
So you had the option not to sin in this world?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Really? That's a new one.
I mean...
So you could have developed a perfect character. You had the option to live a sinless life and didn't need Jesus. Like Adam and Eve in Eden. They had the option to never sin.
Yeah, I think we had that.
Do you understand that that is not what the Bible teaches? The Bible teaches that we do not have the option. We were born in sin, conceived in iniquity.
No, I mean, the reality, I could have had that option if I would have submitted 100% to the Holy Spirit. The only thing is, reality is, only Christ did that. But anyone, I think, would have had that opportunity, not only Christ. But the reality is, only Christ had that.
That's because Christ was unique. If you want to understand why Christ was able to get the victory, Adam came into the world out of the dirt of the earth, and God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a sinless human being. Eve was taken from his side, another sinless human being. You and I were conceived from a sinful mother and a sinful father. Conceived in sin, born in iniquity, conceived in sin. Jesus' humanity didn't come in any of those ways. Jesus' humanity was not made out of dirt and breathed into a sinless human being. He didn't come from the side of a sinless human being, and he didn't come from a sinful mother and a sinful father. Jesus is unique. He came from a sinful mother, but his Holy Spirit was his father, and in Jesus Christ he partook of our fallen condition, but he had a father who constituted a righteous heart and desire. So he had no inclinations within him to sin, but he could be tempted by sin. And thus he overcame where we could not overcome. We could have never overcome where he overcame.
But back to my question is, how could I be acquitted in judgment?
Acquitted. So you have to define the word acquitted. What is the word acquitted?
Guilty, I broke God's law.
Guilty. Again, so if you're in the human law model, then your language works. I reject that language because I don't believe that's our problem. I believe we're born with a condition that is terminal and will result in death unless it is cured by our Creator. And it's cured when we come to trust Him. One back to trust. We open the heart and the Holy Spirit comes in, takes the victory of Christ, not my victory, reproduces it in me, so it's no longer I that live, but Christ lives in me. I get a new heart and right spirit, and the law of sin and death is replaced with the law of life as the Lord writes his law on my heart and mind. I'm a new creature in Christ. That is when the Father looks at me, he sees the righteousness of Christ because the righteousness of Christ is reproduced in me. It's literal, it's real, it's restorative, it's recreative, and there's nothing legal to it. Okay, let somebody else ask a question. You think on that a little while. Okay, back here.
Simple question. So you mentioned social media and it can cause increased levels of anxiety in young people, but we know that they're going to use it regardless. I just wanted to know what your recommendations are for healthy social media engagement.
So social media impairs social functioning. So seriously, if I was raising a child today, I would not let them have access to social media. I wouldn't let them access to it. There's really no, social media will damage children, and especially adolescents. It will damage them. It will make them, it markedly increases body dysmorphic issues, fear anxiety issues, depression issues. There's no real place for a social media account. Bullying goes up. I haven't seen any data anywhere of any benefit from a social media account. I can't justify one. So pardon? Yes. My ministry has a social media Facebook account. I don't do anything personally. The only thing we put there is we put a daily post from Come and Reason Ministries. My blog goes up there. We'll put a little meme up about a Bible verse, something like this. And we have 10,000 some followers following us. And so for those people, they find something inspirational there. So we use it as an outreach tool. But I wouldn't advocate anybody having a social media where they actually try to have social relations. The data, as I've seen, the more social media time they spend digitally, the less interpersonal time they actually spend in real life. And therefore, it's an artificial construct. It's not real. They give false senses of reality in that medium. They'd be well better served to have no social media outlets and to have a small church or a big church, but have a church fellowship with friends their age. They hang out and actually learn how to interact with people. Much healthier for the brain. Yes?
Thank you for coming here. I'm actually a big fan of your work, so just want to thank you for your presentations. I have two questions, and if they're too complicated, we can speak afterwards. The first one has to do with something you mentioned yesterday about the story of the woman who had a one-time event of infidelity, and she was forgiven by God, and she's forgiven by her husband, but she had this kind of self-condemnation. Can you expound upon that in terms of practical steps to overcome that? That's my first question.
So stop there. So self-condemnation was different than what I explored.
Yeah.
In this particular case, she had a problem in decision-making in which she continued to make decisions in her life that were her emotions overruling her own judgment. And every time that would happen, if it wasn't a specific sin like loaning a car to somebody that her judgment said no, then she her mind would bring up the most egregious example of that same type of decision making, so she would feel guilty about that infidelity again. And so when she learned how to actually choose to follow through with her own judgment and set boundaries, say no to people who need to be said no, she stopped feeling the condemnation. She really wasn't feeling condemnation for the infidelity. She was feeling condemnation for the same type of decision-making where she was not staying true to her own self and betraying herself through her emotions and fear of what other people thought of her. That was her problem. So when it talks about self-condemnation, there is a whole host of reasons why people get stuck in that, and it would require talking to somebody to help pull out of a person what is their unique dynamic as to why they're doing that.
Okay. Second question has to do more along the lines of healthcare, because I'm in healthcare and I work with patients with neurological conditions. And I want to hear your perspective as a psychiatrist, the difference between psychosis and demon possession. And have you encountered that? And because in my line of work, I think I do, but I don't know. I don't have enough training in the psychiatric field to determine the difference. And again, super complicated question. But I just
It's not
want to hear
really
your
that
perspective.
complicated, actually.
Okay.
In over 30 years of doing this, I've only had one individual that I ever thought had demonic issues involved rather than psychosis. In America, it's almost always psychosis. 99.9% of the time, it's going to be psychosis. Go with psychosis, and if you think it's otherwise, send them to somebody else. It's rarely, the stuff that we see as psychotic is rarely, I'm being harassed by demons, I'm hearing voices, angels are talking to me. This kind of stuff, it's almost always psychosis. If you read Ellen White, I don't know if you value Ellen White, I would encourage you to look on the database and look up Brother Craig. If you just put in the words Brother Craig, there's a long letter she wrote to Brother Craig. And I think the title of the letter is An Appeal to a Self-Centered Wife. And it describes this wife as immature, childlike, given to rages and temper tantrums if she doesn't get her way, going off and making a scene, hysterical, screaming, seeking to control the will of her husband. But Ellen White goes on to describe that she was shown, and she used the language, I was shown, multiple times, that this woman is harassed by Satan and puts herself into the hands of Satan and is controlled by demons, and the husband is not actually dealing with the irrational and uncontrollable wife. He's now dealing with demonic forces. But it's not hallucinations and psychosis. It's hysterical, behavioral, temper tantrum, acting out of selfishness when you can't get your way. And that's what she describes as demonic behavior. So I'll let you read that and let you weigh in on that. But that's not what we typically see in schizophrenia and things like that.
Thank you.
And if those who can hear us on Zoom, if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat.
Yes?
I like to go back to the topic
Sure. Yeah.
on the balcony.
Yeah. I just wanted to pause and let some things settle for a minute, and we can continue on.
My question is very simple. In the context of the topic that he brought up, how do you relate last day generation theology?
Okay. All right. So I'm going to answer your question and the question of acquitted that he brought up several times. I don't believe we're ever acquitted. I believe we're cured. In all eternity future, when David makes it into heaven, and we look at and we meet David in the hereafter, the history of David's life will still be the same. David will still have had an adulterous relationship with Bathsheba, and he will still have had murdered Uriah. He doesn't get a, not guilty, you didn't do it. No, you get a new heart and right spirit, and you're no longer a murderer and adulterer because you have a new heart and right spirit. It's no longer you that live, but Christ Jesus lives in you. You have a new life. So you're not acquitted, you're cured, you're healed. You have a new heart and a new life. That's what I think happens. The legal model is a complete fraud. It is a complete lie. And I can deconstruct it on every level when we get to heaven and the legal model. The people who hold to that are looking forward to the day no one will ever know about their sins. It's common. I get it all the time because they are gone beforehand into judgment and erased from the books. And so when we get there, we can't know. Really? So we won't know. So when David is in heaven and he's having a conversation with Bathsheba, and Uriah has just come up and they've been reconciled, and Solomon comes up, hey, Dad, hey, Mom, oh, no, I don't know who you are. We won't know who those people, or will we know who? Well, how could Solomon be David's and Bathsheba's child? Where would that come from? Well, we can't know that. We're not allowed to know. You see how silly this gets? Of course we know. What happens is no one has adultery in their heart, no one has selfishness in their heart, no one has murder in their heart. We've been cured, we've been set right with God. And then your question was about last generation theology.
Yeah.
I would tell you, if you want to kind of say, well, what would Jennings say on all of these questions? Start with this question. What law lens are you answering it through? If you answer last generation theology through human law, last generation theology, if I understand the term right, it means about perfection of the people of God before Jesus comes. Isn't that what it's about? A generation of perfect people. Isn't that what kind of the theology is? Yes? No? Am I on the right track here? Okay. And if you have the human law model, then it's all about perfect performance. It's all about perfect behavior. It's all about perfect actions and deeds, and we've got to work perfectly, which is a complete fraud. It's part of the lie that makes people fearful and rejects the true last generation theology, which is about perfect trust in Jesus. That's what it's about. These are they who do not love their life so much as to shrink from death, Revelation chapter 12, verse 11. We come to trust Jesus so much with our lives and with the outcome, and I will give you some examples from Scripture who already achieved it. There were people in history that achieved this already, this perfection. But the last generation, the whole group will achieve it. Who? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego on the plains of Dura. They were perfect. They perfectly trusted God, and they would not compromise even if they got thrown in the fiery furnace. Daniel had that perfect trust, and he would not compromise even though he went in the lion's den. Stephen had that perfect trust. The apostles had that perfect trust, and they would not compromise even to save their own lives. This is the type of perfection that we not love our lives. We're not driven by the survival drives anymore. We won't compromise our faith in Christ in order to protect ourselves, and we won't take advantage of others in order to advance ourselves. This is the settling into the truth, both intellectually and spiritually, that we cannot be moved. It's about a perfect trust in Jesus, that we love him and we trust him with the outcome. That's the last generation theology. Yeah, as I understand it.
My question is to help my young people that I have that may be leaving the church because their questions are not being adequately answered. And I think that's part of the bigger problem of why young people leave the church, because we tell them all these things from a level 1 to level 4, like you said, and we're not giving them the 6s and the 7s they're looking for. And these kids are intelligent, they're smart, and they ask questions.
That's right.
So my question to you is, when a young person says God destroyed the world, I'm talking about with the Noah and the flood and everything, and they ask you, like, you know what, there were little babies there that didn't know right from wrong. How do you then answer the question that, how do you defend that God is not this God of vengeance that will destroy people for the sake of justifying that he does not want sin in the world, whether they even know how to sin or not?
Yep, great question, great question. I want to say before I answer the question, comeandreason.com, comeandreason.com. Because on my website, there's a little search engine, little like hourglass search engine at the top. You could type in flood, for instance, and you would find several blogs where I've gone into details from the scripture and outlined all these answers along these lines. Why did Jesus have to die? Almost everything we've talked about, blogs go back more than 10 years on our website of all different types of topics. But the flood. First thing you have to do is you have to clarify with them, well, what do they think was happening then? What was going on then? Was this punishment for sin? This is how it's often... See, you're dealing with a mind that has probably already been programmed down a false narrative, so they have falsehoods in their mind in operation. They've been told probably with their Bible teachers and the Bible story books they've read and the preachers that they've heard that the flood is an example of God punishing sin. That world was wicked and God punished it. And Sodom and Gomorrah and others. Okay? Well, then you say, well, according to Scripture, the punishment for sin? What is it? The wages of sin is drowning in a flood and being resurrected sometime later. Is that the wages of sin? Death. The wages of sin is death. Which death? The death that Daniel died? Is that the wages of sin, death? When God said, Daniel, you're going to sleep in the dust until the resurrection, was Daniel being punished right then? No, he was not being punished for sin. Remember what wonderful things God said about his friend Daniel. Is that you? Yep, that was her.
Apologies.
Yep. That's funny. So Daniel was not being punished for sin. In other words, sleep death, from which there is resurrection, is not punishment for sin. So no death in Scripture is punishment for sin. All deaths in Scripture are sleep deaths, with the exception of what happened to Christ at the cross, which is a unique death. But it is all human deaths other than Christ at the cross are sleep deaths, and there's a resurrection, either the resurrection of life or the resurrection, but there's still a resurrection. And then, if you want to use the language punishment for sin, that comes at the end of the 1,000 years. So all the Old Testament cannot be put in the category of God punishing sin. So what is it then? What's going on? So ask the question. They put it in the context. They like to think, so ask them. After Adam and Eve sinned in Eden, they've just sinned. Can the human species be saved and have eternal life if Jesus does not come? Yes or no? No. And so Genesis 3:15, the Messiah is promised. The seed of the woman is going to crush the serpent's head. Right there. Boom. Right out the gate. Sin, promised Messiah. Jesus is the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Right there, boom. And so from that moment on, the whole theme of Scripture, especially Old Testament, is fulfilling Genesis 3:15. The covenant of grace, the promised Messiah, Jesus is coming. Satan is working to stop it. He does not want his hold on earth broken. How does he stop it? By getting, besides killing every person, by getting every human heart to harden against God completely. God will not have baby Jesus born to a woman like Jezebel. He will not force a woman against her will to be the mother of Jesus. He needs a righteous, willing woman to be the mother of Jesus, or else Messiah can't come. So if he can get every human heart to permanently harden against God, he shuts down the plan of salvation. You say, well, that's not really realistic, is it? At the time of the flood, time of the flood, how many righteous men left on the earth according to Scripture? One. One righteous man on the whole planet. Every other human being, Noah and his family, the rest of them are hardened and not working with God. How long? So what does it show? God is patient. God is gracious. God waits to the final moment. And then he acts not to punish sin, but to keep open avenue for Messiah so that humans can be saved. It's a beautiful story. Put them to sleep. And so it puts them into sleep mode, and you can use lots of metaphors for that. So you say, you're a parent. You got 10 kids. I know that's hard to think of, but remember, Jacob had 12 or more. Abraham had how many? I don't even know how many Abraham had. Okay, we lost count on that. But you have 10 kids. 5 of them are under the age of 8, and 5 of them are above the age of 20. It's a metaphor. The ones over the age of 20 are like Genesis 6. Violent all the time, corrupt, vile, rebellious, unruly, and they are coming to molest and abuse your small children under the age of 8. You try to intercede, you plead, but they don't listen. They're hardened. They're evil. They're like Sodom and Gomorrah. If you had the ability to put them in cryogenic storage, in other words, you just freeze them in time. You don't kill them. You just freeze them right where they're at, long enough for your other children to grow up healthy, and then you thaw them out, let them finish their life just so they can't hurt thieves. Would you do it? That's what God did when he put people in the grave. He just suspended them in time. They're not dead. They're sleeping. And when they come out of the grave, Ellen White says they come out with the same current of thoughts they went in the grave. He just pushed the pause button on them. That's all he did. Pause. Next. Let's keep rolling. I got a plan to finish here. And then he raises them at the end of the 1,000 years, and they come out of the grave with the same current of thoughts, and they go about living their same rebellious life, and they build implements of war, and they attack the city. Even with the city, they still won't repent. God didn't change the outcome of their life. And so I find it a beautiful story in its proper context. Further, the flood, and what happened at the flood not only kept open avenue for Messiah, it was an opportunity. I'm not saying anybody took it, but it was an opportunity for repentance for that pre-antediluvian world. They heard for 120 years preaching of Noah. They had their scientific experts giving them the lectures that no, there's never been rain and there never will be rain. We're scientists, we know. We've got our degree from the CDC, so we know. And yet when the rain came, after 120 years of preaching, the rain did not cause instant death. There was a flood that came. There was an opportunity. And you can bet there was some reflection. Whoa, maybe Noah was right. And perhaps, I'm not saying there was, but perhaps there was somebody like the thief on the cross who saw Jesus and repented and found salvation. That thief's temporal life was still over, but his eternal life was found. The flood, not only did it keep open avenue for Messiah, it gave every one of those rebellious people one more opportunity to see truth and respond to it. Further, the flood changed the face of the earth, shortening human life for the purpose of interfering with a worldwide rebellion against God again and preventing evil from becoming so strong to the whole population at once again. And this is part of the other reason I think that God did this, an act of grace. Imagine what our world would be like today if Stalins and Hitlers lived 900 years. There's a reason that God allowed all these events to occur like this, and it was all an outworking of grace, and none of it was punishment to punish us for sin. It was all to save us. There's multiple layers there. So great question. I think kids, I've had young people, I won't say kids, but young people I've had this conversation with, when you give them these answers, it really resonates with them. They like answers that make sense. Mm-hmm. Yes?
My question is, you talked about loopholes earlier. Could you just kind of mind going back over that?
Well, I used the term loopholes to describe the penal substitutionary loopholing. For instance, righteous by faith is we have faith and we receive from Christ his righteousness. We're reborn and we become righteous people, and we're recognized as right because we have been changed from enmity to God to trust and love of God and have his Spirit dwelling within us. So we are righteous people. Okay? That's real change. And by the way, that was the message of Jones and Wagner that Ellen White endorsed in 1888, the righteous by faith message. It was rejected by church leadership, and it was supplanted or replaced by the declared to be righteous even though you're not by faith message. Okay? That is the legal loophole method. In other words, when you claim Jesus' blood as your payment in your behalf in heaven in a registry somewhere, God puts a mark and you get to be declared to be righteous even though you're not righteous. So you're not changed, you're not healed, you're not transformed, you're not renewed, you're not recreated. You're still just a wicked old sinner living in sin, but God declares you. And when he looks at you, he doesn't see your wickedness. He sees the righteousness of Christ who stands between you as a filtering mechanism to obscure the perfect view of the Father who would otherwise see your sin, and he only sees the righteousness of his Son. It's complete corruption. It's legal loopholing. Pardon? Heavy topic. Oh, let me tell you. Because of the misrepresentation of God's law and thus making God out to be the source of death, almost all of Christianity teaches that we need somebody or something done to hide us or protect us from God. Almost all Christian theologies teach it. It's all fraud. We need something to take away our sin. Here's the Lamb of God who takes away the... Notice what the Bible actually says. The Lamb of God who takes away the... You know, that's not what's taught. Here's what's taught. The Lamb of God who takes away the punishment of God for the sin of the world. That's what's taught. It's a lie. It's a corruption. So sin pays its wage. The wage is death. Those who sow to the carnal nature, from that nature reap destruction, Galatians 6:8. Sin, when full grown, brings forth death, James chapter 1:15. Scripture's very clear on this. God is not the source of death. Death does not come out from God. It comes out from sin, unremedied in the sinner. And God is the source of salvation that fixes the sin problem in us. It's quite a different view.
Yes, just to add on what my friend was saying, so just a question here. So with the penal loophole, right? If I'm claiming God's righteousness, the law, we're judged by the law of God, right? In James 2, we're judged by the law of God. That's the standard by which we're judged, right? So the law of God, it demands perfection immediately and continually. I'm not perfect, but the law of God is. And his righteousness is perfect. So while God is growing me, he's in me and I'm in him. That's where that righteousness comes from, because it's Christ's righteousness. And as there's no condemnation as I'm in Christ. But that the law of God is by which we're going to be judged, or the standard, which is his character. Right? I mean, I'm just trying to get an understanding of what
Well,
you're
so
saying.
all those words you're using are very important and valuable words,
Right.
but I would say, what law lens are we defining the words through? When you use the word like we're judged, are we using a human law model and a judicial process? So judge means an external judicial process examining behavior and deeds and making a judgment on whether we have performed properly or not. Or are we using judge like you would when you went in the doctor's examining room and the doctor examines you and makes a judgment about what's wrong with you? Which way do we use the term judged? And if we're using judged in a legal way, then I don't believe that's Scripture. If we're using judged in the design law way, where God looks at us and judges what's wrong with us, and then judges what's necessary to heal us, and then provides for us the treatment or the solution that fixes what's wrong with us, then yes, judgment is quite a righteous thing to use there. But when we use the same language through a human law model, we actually end up misrepresenting the entire plan, creating a false legal paradigm that keeps people trapped in a sin problem they can't get out of. But they can feel good about themselves because they claim the right blood to pay the right penalty while they continue to beat their wife at home.
Let me ask you a question. What is your definition of sin and righteousness?
So there's two definitions in Scripture that I like of sin. Right. One is, if you want to use the language, sin is transgression of the law. How do we define law? I defined it today. God's design, the laws that he built reality to operate upon, law of love, law of truth, law of liberty. These are the laws that emanate from his character, and he sustains all of his universe through these laws. Out of harmony with that takes you out of harmony with God. That is what sin is. Or anything that is not of faith is sin, meaning we're breaking trust with God. That is also sin. We're acting rebelliously. So both of those things are out of harmony with his nature and character. That is what sin is.
What's righteousness then?
Righteousness in the Greek is the same word as, believe it or not, justice or just. So being righteous is being right with God. Well, what's wrong that needs to be put right? This also means to put something right means to justify it. Well, what does justify mean? Well, if you had a Word document, on a computer document, and you justify the margins, what are you doing to your margins? You're putting them in line. What is it that's out of harmony that needs to be put right? It's not our historical record. It's the actual heart and mind of us. We are natural heart, according to Romans 8, is enmity to God. We are naturally, because of Adam's sin, filled with fear and self-centeredness. We operate out of harmony with God. That heart needs to be put right or set right with God. We have to have fear and selfishness eradicated or destroyed, and love and trust written in. I'll write my law in your heart and mind. We have to be reborn or recreated, or have the heart circumcised, the heart of stone moved, and the heart of flesh put in. We have to be recreated or regenerated. That's what righteousness is. We receive a new life from Christ, and we are new creatures. The old is gone, the new has come. That is what it means to become the righteousness of God. It's a literal transforming experience.
Okay. But isn't there something wrong with us in regards to how we're born?
Yes.
So even if I'm doing right things because of my very nature, that's what makes it corrupt. Like if I do good things, but because of my nature, it makes it corrupt because of the selfishness that's in me.
Tell me
right?
about Job.
About Job? What about Job?
Well, what did God say about Job in the first chapter?
Job said he was perfect.
God said, who said it?
God said he was perfect.
Okay, does that mean he wasn't a sinner? He doesn't have all these problems that you're describing that we have? He didn't have them? How could God say he was perfect if he had all these problems you're describing?
I understand what you're saying
Do you?
on that. Yeah, I understand. The perfection is in Jesus. That's the whole point of me accepting his righteousness.
So Job wasn't perfect and righteous. God was mistaken about that. And Satan was right when he said, oh, no, he's not.
The perfection is in Jesus.
So
That's where the perfection comes from.
So Job wasn't perfect and righteous.
Yeah, but it's in God. Because if you look
So
at
it wasn't in Job.
No,
Job didn't possess it anymore. It wasn't a gift that he received from the Holy Spirit reproduced in Job. Its source was in Jesus, but it wasn't in Job.
We are complete or perfect in him.
So this is the loopholing question we're asking then. Is the victory that Christ achieved for us something we actually partake of, ingest, internalize, and it becomes part of us so that we actually are new creatures in Christ? Or do we remain the same old wicked, corrupt creatures, but we are declared to be a new creature even though we're still a corrupt creature? Which way is it?
It's in him, but he gives it to us. That's where sanctification
Gives it
comes
to
from.
us in our being, so it becomes part of us and we are that?
Yes, his Holy Spirit gives
All right.
us his righteousness,
So
but it's all in Jesus.
So
everything, his righteousness, his perfection, his faith is his faith.
It's sourced in Jesus,
yes,
reproduced in us.
absolutely.
Okay, then
Absolutely.
we're on the same page here.
Okay, we're on the same page. There you go.
It's not a declaration. It's not a legal accounting mechanism in a book. It's literal in the believer.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
we're on it, man.
Okay, all right.
Okay. But do you see the language? We have to have a conversation. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your friendly conversation. But we have to have a conversation to parse out, because the words have meanings, just like the word judgment I used, and it can mean two completely different things. And we had to do this to kind of come to a meeting of the minds, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Thank you. Yes.
My question is: there's different types of people that God himself obviously has created. You have more
different types of people that what?
That God has created. He's created more left-brain people, right-brain people, people that are more analytical, people that are more creative. So I was just thinking about, your friends and how they don't like you to be next to them when they watch a TV show or something, pointing out all the, rational bits of shows, and even if they're, let's say, good shows, but they're creativity. How would you comment on just having right brain and left brain people and efforts, I guess, coexist? Because I think maybe creatively minded people would look at you and say, you're such a rational and great person, but I haven't been coded that way. Not that I can't apply my mind to those types of things, but this is how I'm made. So how do you have that coexist for those people?
Do you remember a passage in Scripture about the church membership being gifted with different gifts? Mm-hmm. That's how I would apply it. God has gifted different people with different gifts because the body of Christ is benefited by people having different ways of approaching things, different talents, different gifts. Some people are going to be more analytic. Some people are going to be more creative. God actually gifted in the Old Testament times an entire family with very special artistic and creative talents to make the sanctuary stuff. Those were gifts that they needed. Organizational gifts, pastoring gifts, all types of language gifts. We need them all. So I wouldn't suggest it in any way to diminish anybody's gifts. Just find the best place they can fulfill them. But you said something interesting. I don't know if I should. Yeah, I will. You said God creates a different type of people. There's an assumption in that. There's an assumption in Christianity. I find this all the time. I wrote about it in my books. And it can cause a lot of mental health problems. The assumption is that God created each one of us.
Or he gives us the talents, perhaps. Maybe that's a better way
that each
to
one
say
of
it.
us were created by God. This is an assumption. Most Christians believe it. Okay, let that simmer for a minute. If you were to use Scripture, there are only 3 human lives that God directly had a hand in creating. Only 3. Adam, Eve, and Jesus. He gave Adam and Eve an ability to procreate, and they used that ability to create beings in their image. But there's this mythos, and it becomes very damaging. And I have patients see me all the time. Why did God want me to have bipolar disorder? God made me. Why did God make me with bipolar disorder? Well, God didn't make you with bipolar disorder. He made sinless Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve corrupted themselves, and now we have all these genetic defects in the human genome, and we produce beings in our own image, and the things that I went through in the last talk about how we epigenetically alter ourselves and pass it down through the gene. This is using an ability God has given us, but God is not the source of pain, suffering, and death, and He doesn't create disease. He creates perfection. I can tell you right now, I'm here as a unique individual. Yes, God foreknew I would be here, but it was a choice on my mother and father to have special relations at a particular cycle of my mother's months. If they would have skipped that month and had a child the following month, it would be one of my siblings. It wouldn't be me. You get that, right? God didn't make the choice for them to do that. They made that choice to do that. It gets worse. When a man rapes a woman and she gets pregnant, is that an act of God? Some Christians teach it is. Some Christians teach it is. Do you know how destructive that is to someone's spiritual development? No, that is a man abusing an ability God gave him. When God gave Samson strength, which was a gift from God, supernatural strength, right? Did God control how Samson used it? Yes or no? God gave us an ability. He does not control how we use it. We can use it godly, or we can abuse the ability. I just put this out there because this idea, I believe we were created as a species in Adam and Eve, and I believe God has foreknowledge and can call us, like He called Cyrus before Cyrus' birth, to be the one to release the children of Israel and send them back. So God can look down and see who's going to be and call us for purposes, and He has a special place for every one of us. But that is not the same thing as God acting with divine power from heaven to create us with our problems and our sicknesses. That puts a responsibility in God that is not His. Does that make sense to everyone? Did I upset anybody? Okay, there's a question back here.
So you're saying we were not created in God's image?
We were in Adam and Eve. Absolutely. Adam and Eve were created in God's image, and God gave them the ability to create beings in their image. And thus, when they changed themselves, we were born in the image of Adam and Eve. In other words, born in sin, conceived in iniquity, because they had children after they sinned. Being born in sinfulness is not the image of God, but the other attributes that we've inherited, intelligence, capacity for love, capacity for procreation, for governance, for dominion, these are elements of the image of God, but not the sinfulness piece.
Okay.
Right?
There's a text that I received with a question, so I will read that here. So can you elaborate on the transition between level 4 and level 5 in the context of raising children? Why do teenagers who are raised by God-fearing parents why do parents who raise teenagers sometimes lose their children to the world when they turn 16 or so?
So my view is primarily that the children have not really appreciated the reasons. If the children understand that their behavior has consequence, there's actual design laws involved, they have the freedom to do these things, but if they want to be healthy and not suffer, they won't do them because there's inherent built-in consequences to acting unrighteously or sinfully. They tend to not go that direction. What happens is when they believe the penal legal model that sin is behavioral in a legal way, and the only problem with doing sin is you get legal trouble, which has to be legally punished. But if you get Jesus' blood, then you're out of trouble. And so I have adolescents. I've done lectures on human sexuality, and I've taken anonymous questions, because adolescents won't ask public questions about sex, and anonymous questions. And one of the questions that commonly comes in from adolescents is, if God has forgiven me all my sins, then what's wrong with premarital sex? You see, that's a perfect question if the only problem is legal. If the problem's legal, if I have diplomatic immunity for driving, speeding, and I can never get a fine and I can never get a ticket, then what's the problem with speeding? I speed all the time. See? And this is the problem when we teach kids a legal Christianity. They will come up with questions like this that the legal explanation cannot answer, and they will go off into rebellion because it makes no sense. Or they're covered, or you get a Roman system. And what's the Roman system? Yes, there are mortal sins, but as long as you come to confession with the priest, do your penance, you can still run your mafia and still call out hits on people and still bring in illegal drugs and extort people down at the docks. You can do that as long as you get the proper penances and confess it, because it's all legally, mechanically handled. And the evangelical world doesn't do the priestly confession. They do I claim Jesus as my Savior, and all my sins, past, present, and future, are put on Him, and He paid the price for them, and therefore I'm saved, and once I'm saved, I'm always saved. So I can still go out and live in sin. It's another legal loophole. And so when we teach any of this irrational stuff, the way you help kids is anchor them in the God of creation who builds reality and whose laws are the laws that life and health actually operate upon. And you cannot have health while violating the laws of health. You can't have it. Adolescents don't think this way. They think child rules. What's wrong with playing in the street to a child? Mommy will punish. That's what's wrong. Mommy said don't do it, and you will get punished. Okay? Well, when we grow up, we understand that there was an actual reason. That one's pretty obvious, and people can figure that one out. But there are other rules that we sometimes give our kids. My wife grew up, child of an Adventist pastor, and as a child, and I grew up as an Adventist with an Adventist mom that raised me, we could wade on Sabbath, but we couldn't swim on Sabbath. Some of you all laughing. Would you understand how destructive to a child's spiritual understanding rules like that are? Where in Scripture does it say, thou shalt not get in the water on Sabbath? If you actually look at Scripture, the Scripture is quite amazing. What the Scripture actually says, thou shalt not work. You or your employees or your people in your gates, you shouldn't do work. But it never defines what work is. It leaves it open for you to figure out in your relationship with the Lord, what is work? Well, if you're a pastor, you definitely don't come to church. You stay home that day because you don't want to work on Sabbath. Oh no, we worked that one out. You're allowed to work on Sabbath if you're a pastor, okay? And a doctor, and an emergency, and a nurse, okay? Okay, on and on the list goes. We have our approved list of works, but the Jewish people did the same thing. They made 600 different lists of works that are considered work, and you can't do those on Sabbath. And it becomes complete idiocy, complete ridiculousness. Any rational person goes, if that's what God is, I'm not going to believe in Him. So we can't teach our kids irrational things. We have to teach them the truth about what the Sabbath is about. And the Sabbath is a gift. Understand, the Sabbath is a gift. It's a gift. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Think about it. The gymnasium down the street was made for people. The people were not made for the gymnasium. You can use the gymnasium or not use the gymnasium. If you use it as it's designed, you get stronger. If you don't use it, you don't benefit from it. The Sabbath is made for man. It's a specific benefit. There's a blessing. There's a strength that comes if you benefit from the gift and use it the way God has given us. Yes, what is the benefit? The Sabbath is a sign that I am the Lord that sanctifies you. What is a sign? What is a sign? It's a mark. It's a flag. I don't see one up here, but if we had a U.S. flag up here, the U.S. flag is a sign of the U.S. government. When you see the flag waving, it has a certain meaning. If you were a captive POW and you saw someone waving your nation's flag, it would give you hope, it would give you inspiration. But the flag is not the government. The flag is only a sign of the government. The Sabbath is a sign of the government of God. And what is the sign that the flag waves, the Sabbath waves every week? When did the Sabbath come into existence? See, this is where a lot of people who still see the law kind of like imposed rules don't get this. They actually think the Ten Commandments are eternal. Do any of y'all think the Ten Commandments were in existence in heaven before humankind was made? It was not. There was no law that the sins would pass down 3 and 4 generations among the angels. There was no law for the angels to honor their mothers and fathers. There was no law for the angels to not commit adultery with each other. This is a distillation of the great law of love, specifically codified for sinful human need. The Sabbath was made for man. It had a beginning point. It did not exist prior to the creation of planet Earth. It was made at the end of the 6 days of creation recorded in Genesis. And what was happening in the universe the week of creation in Genesis? There was a war. Lucifer had already started his rebellion. There was a war against the government of God. What kind of war? It says in Revelation it was a polemo or a polemic. It was a war of words, a war of arguments, a war of ideas. Satan is the father of lies. He's lying about God. He's trying to influence people, the intelligences of the universe, to distrust God. And how does God win a war like that? If you're being lied about. If somebody comes up here, maybe your brother, I don't know if you have a brother or not, maybe you have a brother who comes up here one day and gets before the church and says, guys, I've got some bad news. I've discovered that Pastor Q has been embezzling money from the church funds. Now, it's not true. He hasn't taken a penny. In fact, he's given extra tithe and offerings to the church, okay? Okay? Okay. All right. But if his brother says this to you and he says, I'm only telling you this so you guys can pray that he'll repent and turn the money back in. And he hears about what the brother has told you all, and he gets up and says, guys, I haven't taken a penny. Would that convince all of you? Would the question be over? Or once the lie is out there, in order to truly settle it, what's required? Evidence, right? And so an outside auditor comes in and line by line and penny by penny, as every penny is accounted for and there's nothing missing, the liar is exposed, the truth sets the minds free, and the innocent is exonerated. Okay? Lucifer's lying. Can God win simply by declaring the truth? Certainly he'll declare the truth. And you read in Patriarchs and Prophets, in the first chapter, in the opening of the great controversy, you read in Desire of Ages, it is finished. You can read this description of this war and how it began in heaven. So he certainly declares the answer, but that's not sufficient to win the day. God is a God that gives evidence. And so as the lies are circulating in heaven, and you can imagine, just imagine you're an angel in heaven. And from the moment you have been wakened into perfect sinless creation, you meet Jesus, you meet the Father, you meet another being who was created before you, the son of the dawn, known as Lucifer. And you have something really special in common with Lucifer because you're an angel and he's an angel. You got a lot in common. You travel together, sing in the choir together. You've been to his house. He's been to your house. 2 million years have gone by. And then one day he comes from God's presence with tears in his eyes and begins telling you things about God that you've never heard before and are really unsettling. You have this weird emotion you've never had before that you later learn is fear and anxiety because it's upsetting. What would you do? Would you maybe want to pray for wisdom? So you go to God yourself. You say, God, Lucifer's been saying some things about you, and you know, it's fairly unsettling, but Lord, you know, I love you, but I love Lucifer too. And God might say, well, love is good. I'm glad you love us both, but I have to assure you what Lucifer's saying is wrong. It's not true. I knew it had to be misunderstanding. I knew it. Oh, I feel much better. Lucifer, I just had to talk with God, and God just said, I just talked to him about what you said, and he said, it's all misunderstood. What you're saying is not true. And Lucifer puts a hand on your shoulder, looks you in the eye, and said, I know, that's the problem. God's lying. Now, in that circumstance, in universal history, if you were that angel, what historic evidence could you point to know who was telling the truth? Remember in Scripture it says that he was perfect in all his ways until the day iniquity was found. In the history of Lucifer, there was nothing to point to. And so, what does God do in that context? He begins giving evidence. And I don't have time to lay out the entire foundation of what Lucifer's lives were built on, but I can tell you they were attacked on the position of Christ. He was claiming equality with Christ. And so God, this is why Christ is a member of the Godhead through whom all things were made, and nothing was made that has been made. Jesus was the member that was the executive agent that acted to create here, because he was demonstrating that, in fact, there's a difference between Lucifer and Jesus. They're not the same. He's a creator. He's not. And so Jesus begins to say, let there be light. Let the firmament come forth. Let the land come forth. And you imagine the crescendo of the intelligences in heaven. Wow, did you see what Jesus did today? What do you think he's going to do tomorrow? And they're watching this. Let us make man in our image. Let them be fruitful and multiply in a world before sin. And what was God's intention for Adam and Eve? For the two to come together in the unity of love and to give of themselves and to produce beings in their own image in a sinless world. Would they have had children to exploit, to dominate, to abuse? Or would they have sacrificed of themselves, constantly giving of themselves for the welfare of their children? What would it have looked like? And the universe would have seen, oh, God didn't create us for us to serve him. He's giving of himself for us constantly. Part of the lesson book was this planet to reveal God's nature and character and dominion and how he governs. And Adam and Eve were to govern this whole planet with all the animals like Godhead runs the universe. It's not done yet. We're talking about the Sabbath. Now, we can take a few grams of matter. We can turn that matter back into energy, and we call that a nuclear explosion with just a few grams of matter. That's how much energy is in a few grams. How much energy did Jesus expend to create the entire planet? Do you understand that it's immeasurable for us to figure out the expenditure of energy when Jesus built this solar system, this planet, our sun, the planets of the solar system. When he was speaking that week, what a display of might and power. And Lucifer said, guys, I never said he wasn't powerful. I said, you can't trust him. He's just flexing his muscles. He's just trying to show you that he can wipe you out like that and replace you with a new intelligent creature anytime he wants. Look at those new ones down there. And he even gives them more abilities. He doesn't need you. He's trying to get you to fall in line or else. And what does God say at that point? Universe, you've heard the allegations of my enemy. You've seen the evidence that we've just created. Now, universe, I rest my case. Take 24 hours aside. No pressure, no coercion. I will cease using power. 24 hours are time for you to think, reflect, and decide. The Sabbath is the sign or evidence of our Creator God who builds reality in love and then leaves beings free to decide for themselves. And so what's the gift of the Sabbath? It is recognition of the government of God, the design laws of God, the celebration of the freedom we have that every Sabbath built into time. Understand, this particular flag that God built is not like our cloth flag that you can burn and hide. This flag is built into time, and every being goes through it every week, whether they know it or not. It's there. And it is a signal or sign of the principles of God, and the true Sabbath keeper is the one who lives those principles all week long. We live the truth, we present it in love, and we leave other people free. Sunday, by the way, is a mark of a different system. Sunday came into existence as a day of worship through legislation, not creation. Sabbath was created and is the sign of design law and the Creator. Sunday was legislated and is a sign of human law, imperialism, and coercive force. And thus they stand for two different systems and two different governments. And you can be a so-called Sunday-marked person by wanting the Savior off the cross by sunset to keep the Sabbath. Because the methods you're using are the methods of the imperial coercive system, not the methods of truth, love, and freedom. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a quick question going back to the 7 levels and how level 1 through 4 is more selfish, and then 5 through 7. So, taking example of Jesus, when he was dying on the cross, he was operating at the level 7, selfless. And the religious leaders of the day, they were, law-abiding. They were at a level 4. And so there was conflict there, and it's very obvious and apparent. Can you give examples of any type of conflict within level 5 through 7? In say, would that result in like the 41,000 different denominations or versions, or is it a spectrum of conflict that's more of like a we agree to disagree, or what would that conflict look like, and what examples can you give?
So level 5, people who have love in their hearts and want to be a blessing to others, but they don't yet operate at level 6, will be enablers often. They want to help people, they want to bless people, but they will take actions that actually harm people. A good example would be George Washington when he got pneumonia, and the doctors who wanted to save his life bled him and leeched him. And they bled him and leeched him, not trying to harm him, because they didn't understand the laws of health, which would be level 6 understanding, laws of health, and how the immune system works and so forth, that bleeding him out would kill him. They had a misunderstanding about those realities and thought they were evil humors giving him fever. And so with their compassionate level 5 heart of wanting to save him, they took actions that actually harmed him. And so there's often conflicts where people have the right motives, but not understanding God's design law methods and principles will take actions that actually cause injury and harm. But they're not lost for it, because they're not rebelling and they're not trying to injure, and there's no evil in their heart. They're only trying to protect. They just don't understand the principles involved in the situation. Read Ellen White Widely. She talks quite clear on this issue about having to know the principles involved in the circumstance in order to make wise decisions. Yeah. Go ahead.
I've got a question for you. I've heard, have not read, that the Great Controversy has been rewritten in a different form. Have you heard anything on that? I don't. I just been brushed by it. So I don't want to create controversy.
In Ellen White's day, there were at least 4 different versions of this document. At least 4 different versions while she was alive that were made various changes and edits on while she was alive. So and you can in the database there's the Great Controversy 888, which is the 1888 version, and there's the 1911 version that came out later, which is most of the standard version. But then many of her Conflict of the Ages series have been updated with trying to update it with non-King James Bible verses inserted wherever she's quoting them, taking out some of the maybe archaic language or expressions of her day that don't make a lot of sense and trying to make it in more modern speech. I've heard of these types of projects going forward. I don't know the specific one you're talking about. Yeah. Do you know, Pastor? No? Yeah. Okay.
I think you gave a good explanation of that. Yeah. I mean, there's the editing that went through, but that's about it.
And then there's the rephrasing for a more modern kind of language. I've heard some of the works that have been done that way haven't necessarily been as true to her message. So I get real uncomfortable with some of that, but yeah.
You mentioned, sorry. Thank you. We are even. You mentioned a short time ago that after the millennium.
So I didn't understand that.
After the millennium.
After the millennium, gotcha.
I could tell it in Hungarian, then would be better for me, but would be more difficult for you.
Well, we would need somebody to translate your speaking in tongues if you did that.
Let's come back to the topic. Those outside the city try to storm the city. Mm-hmm. And then the end will come. Yeah. My basic question, they see the tree of life, the only source of life that they covet. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, every knee will bow outside, acknowledge. Why isn't there any conversion available after the millennium? I'm done.
So this is a great question. It's understanding the nature and character of sin. If sin is a legal problem, and that's all it is, then your question is quite valid if we're a human model. But if sin is actually a condition of being that destroys the faculties that respond to love and truth, then what happens for people who persist in sin, they come to a point when there is no amount of love or any amount of truth that has any impact on them, because the faculties that God gave them that are sensitive to love and truth have been destroyed within them. You can actually get this description in Ellen White's writings where she describes that after Lucifer was cast out of heaven, he saw a passing angel and asked for an audience with Christ. And with that audience with Christ, he in one description, he is in tears. She describes it in another place where Christ was in tears. And so you have both of them crying over this event where he acknowledges that he was wrong and he would be willing to take back his previous place and appointments. And Jesus said that he could not be taken back because the seeds of rebellion remained within him. Meaning he was sorry for the consequences of what he had done. He was sorry for the way life turned out to be for him in his new position. But he was not actually converted from fear, selfishness, pride, arrogance to a humble, loving, cooperative agent in God's kingdom anymore. So he still remained hardened in heart. There was nothing more God could do from him. And then she goes on to say that man was in a different position than that of Satan. Satan sinned in the light of God's glory. To him, as to no other created being, was given a revelation of God's love. But not so with man. Man was deceived. The height and the depth of the love of God he did not know. There was hope for him in a revelation of the character of God. Okay? Mm-hmm. Alrighty, guys. One more question, and we will call it quits.
I don't have a question.
Yeah.
It's more of a comment because someone might be helped by something that helped me a lot, and that is how the Ten Commandments relate to the 7 levels of that you've discussed here today. We have a tendency to hang our hat. It's our starting place and it's our ending place on the Ten Commandments. Not realizing when I came to the understanding, it occurred to me who those commandments were given to. It made all the difference. They were given to the Israelites that were in bondage for 400 years. They were most likely illiterate. They were spiritually and otherwise atrophied. They knew of no God at that point except for what they were exposed to, the pagan gods around them. Their reason was even not functioning because they were not allowed to use their reason. All they knew was, you can do this and you cannot do that. So God comes at Mount Sinai after he delivers them and he meets them where they are and he says, do this, don't do that. Yeah. That was their starting point. That's not where, we are far beyond the starting point of when God gave the commandments, which is why Jesus came. And he said, I did not come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill the law. So if the 10 commandments are the starting point, Jesus' life and what he bids us to be and where we should be going is far beyond that, which is then the starting point of the 10 commandments, you could say, involved levels 1 through 4, but God wants us to go much further than that, and that does not abolish or cause us to not believe in the 10 commandments. It actually fulfills them and takes us much further.
Thank you. All righty, let's see. Yes, this gentleman was going to say something over here. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Job had also fear. He said, the fear that I have greatly feared has come upon me.
Yeah.
And after he has gone through the experience, he had again children, but there is no evidence that he had that fear. How did he lose that fear?
I think I love what you're describing there because I think Job stands symbolically for the people who go through the time of trouble in the end.
Yes, so that's what one other question.
Okay.
That Mrs. White was saying, at the end, the fear will be so great that it will fill man's heart.
Yes.
How do we develop not to have that kind of tormenting fear?
So Job's perfection was not perfection of emotional valence or feelings. It was perfection that in spite of his fears, anxieties, heartache, grief, misunderstanding, he had still trust in God. And that he would not be shaken out of that trust. His wife tried to say, oh, just deny God and curse them and die. But Job said, you know what? I don't understand what's happening. I can't figure it all out. But even if it were God that were to slay me, I will still trust him. That is the perfection, that we have had some experience with God, some exposure to him in our personal journey, that we have been won to such a level of trust in him that even when we're faced in tribulation, trials, hardship, we may not understand why it's happening to us, we will still trust God. Amen. That is the perfection.
How could our heart not fail? Even if,
what? Hold the mic. Use the mic, yeah.
How could we prevent our heart to fail from fear? When at the end,
I don't think the righteous have their heart failing for fear. It's not the righteous. Ellen White describes that the righteous will be tempted and will doubt their experience with feelings of doubt, but they will not fail, she goes on to say. Yes, they will. The closer we come to Christ, she describes, the more inadequate we feel in ourselves. But that is an evidence of the growth and the journey that we're having with Christ. Yeah. Yes.
We just have 2 more questions.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Ellen White talks about the law of God in heaven. How different is that from the 10 Commandments? I mean, I understood what you said about committing adultery and all that, but what is this law that she's talking about?
So as she said to the angels, the thought that there was a law was something unthought of. But it was still there, but they didn't think of it. So think about Isaac Newton. When Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravity, he didn't create the law of gravity, but he discovered it, and he comes home and tells all his friends, hey, let me describe, and here's an equation I've worked out for the law of gravity. Can't you imagine all his friends going, there's a law about that? It never occurred to me that that was a law. That's just how things work. That's the law of God in heaven. How he constructed all life to work, built on design laws, and it never occurred to them that that was actually a law. The 10 Commandments, a codification of the law of love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. First 4. Love your neighbor as yourself. Last 6. A codification specifically coded for human sinners, not angels. Angels never had a law that looked like the 10 Commandments. Sins don't pass down 3 and 4 generations. There was no Sabbath law in heaven because it didn't exist yet. It hadn't been created. There was no honor your mother and father, no adultery commandment. None of that was in heaven. But the law of love and the protocols God built reality, that was just how things worked. And it never occurred to them that that was a law. That's just how it works.
So did Lucifer not know that he was sinning?
Ellen White describes, go and read what she writes about that. She describes that at first he didn't fully appreciate the direction he was going. But later, once when he was bearing falsehood, he became convinced that he was wrong, and he still so in the beginning he didn't fully appreciate it, no. But he did become convinced he was wrong, and he still persisted in it. Then back here, yes.
My daughter, she has autism and a lot of other neurological delays. Her whole 7 years of life, I've always heard 2 different camps. One camp being like, oh, autism and all her other delays are incurable, and, there's no hope there. And then the other camp will always tell me, like, with God, anything is possible, and she, you just have to have faith, and, she can overcome this, autism and her other delays. So I kind of want to know, like, where should I stand as a Christian mother between those 2 different sides? And where should I understand I have to have faith in God, but I know a part of me also understands that there's certain things that, because of sin, can't really change.
If your child, rather than having autism, was born with either blindness or deafness, and the doctors say there's no treatment, we know how to fix this blindness or deafness, would you still struggle with your question? Would you still struggle, well, God can cure it? Well, sure he can. He's a God of miracles. He can miraculously cure blindness and deafness. But without a miraculous cure, do you expect your child to live like a seeing or hearing person until the cure comes? You don't. You treat them, and you get them a seeing eye dog. You teach them Braille, et cetera, until the miracle. If God wants to perform a miracle, he performs one. Your faith, you trust God, and this is one of the things I wrote in my book, I think, The God-Shaped Brain. Miracles in Scripture are almost always for the weak in faith, not the strong in faith. They're rarely done for the strong in faith. Rarely. In fact, it's difficult to see. Gideon needed the fleece because his faith was really strong, or his faith was weak and he needed encouraging. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, those miracles were not actually done primarily for those 4 people. They were done for the kings that needed to be reached through those miracles. The fire on Mount Carmel was not done for Elijah. It was done for the people who had weak faith. The healings that the apostles did and Christ did, those miracles were not done for Christ or for the apostles. They were done for all the people who were struggling with their weak faith. And so typically what you find, and Paul, who was a man of great faith, had a health problem of some kind that God wouldn't heal for him. You remember? He prayed over him, and God finally said, stop asking me about it. Does that mean Paul didn't have enough faith? So there's a mythos in Christianity that if you have faith, you get a miracle, and if you don't get a miracle, it means your faith isn't strong. That is almost always exactly the opposite of the truth. Typically, those with great faith are the ones that God knows doesn't need the miracle to keep them faithful to him.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Events in the world and how they relate to biblical prophecy.
So I wrote 2 blogs. I would encourage you to go to my website and read King of the North, King of the South, Daniel 11. If you look at Daniel 11, the King of the North, the first blog traces through the Bible text through history. And the King of the South is symbolically represented in the prophecies of Egypt. Egypt symbolically represents godlessness. Who is God that I should know him, Pharaoh says. Okay? And King of the North, King of the South are both Satan's forces in history. King of the North is represented in the prophecy by both Babylon and Rome. Babylon, as soon as Nebuchadnezzar sees the fiery furnace, he passes a ruling. Anybody who speaks against Daniel's God should be put to death. This is religious imperialism. People who believe in God but use the power of the state to enforce it upon others and punish people who don't. So King of the South, godlessness in all its forms. King of the North, religious imperialism. Both are Satan's forces through history, and the beautiful land is in the middle. The beautiful land are the people of God. Both the godless and the imperial religious people are Satan's agents, warring back and forth over the beautiful land to seduce the people in the beautiful land to pick a side. Pick a side. And so if you come down through history in this prophecy, there's a point in time the King of the North kills the Son of God. This is a Roman. This is when the King of the North, and the King of the South comes out against him, and back and forth they go. The last movements are the King of the South attacks the King of the North, and the King of the North storms out against him, takes his power, takes his wealth, and then Michael stands up, the prince, and the second coming comes. I think we're seeing right now the final push of the King of the South, which is communism, evolutionism, godlessness, leftism, greenism, all this godless forces in the world, LGBTQism, and all this kind of stuff is pushing hard from the left. And it's the final movement. You are also starting to see in the last year and a half the rising up of the King of the North and the powers that are going to empower the King of the North powers. And this is going to be the real trap for the beautiful land, the people of God, because they're going to be tempted to join with the conservative political forces to use the power of the state to take control and punish the people that they have seen exploiting the godlessness from the left. And it's a trap of Satan. God's people are in neither one of these things. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. And we know that in the end, that the worldwide conglomeration of powers are going to come that are going to persecute people on religious matters and various things. But I think you're going to see this, and I see signs of it everywhere. I see signs of it in a school board recall in San Francisco, where they recalled liberal school board members. Up in Wisconsin, the county in which they had the BLM riots up there had their first Republican mayor and the 3 school board members that just came up for election, all Republicans. First time in over 40 years in this city. Let's see, the Supreme Court and what they're about to do, perhaps. What's going on? Seattle elected the first Republican mayor in who knows how long in Seattle. And on and on and on the list goes. You're seeing a strong swing towards political conservatism, which will seduce Christians into joining that side to pass laws. Florida, they just took Disney's self-ruling away from them from 1967. 50-some years of self-governance and taxing authorities and so forth was just revoked from Florida because of their leftist push. So you're seeing, there's all across the nation, we're seeing this push. And I think it's the rising up of the King of the North. And God's people have to be wise enough not to join either party. Because God's kingdom is not of this world, and the trap. And here's a trap to watch for. Satan will identify a principle or a goal for which you agree, whatever it might be. Sanctity of marriage of one man and one woman, something most Christians would agree on. But then he will try to trick you into using his methods to advance the goal. The goal is right. What method would we use? Maybe the abortion question. Maybe you have a pro-life orientation. And that is a biblical principle. A godly principle is always promoting life. It's not promoting death. Okay? That's the right principle. Where does the devil trap you? Well, does he ever trap people into using his methods? So, for instance, when we talk about methods, would we shoot abortion doctors and blow up abortion clinics to protect the unborn because we want to protect life? Would those methods be acceptable? Well, some people have done that in history. You know that, right? Okay. Oh, we wouldn't do that. How about we'll stand outside of an abortion clinic and throw blood on adolescent girls that have been raped going in to get an abortion? We'll throw blood on them to intimidate them. Would that be a method that Jesus would use? Or how about we would commit fraud if we could in an election to make sure that a pro-life candidate got elected so we could change the laws to eliminate it? So we wouldn't kill anybody to do it. We would commit fraud to do it. Would that be a good method to use? You see, it's not about the principle anymore. The trap is to join forces with people that will use Satan's methods to achieve the goal. That's the trap. And I think that's what you're going to see. And it might not be the abortion issue. It might not be the marriage issue. It might be some other issue. But the trap for Christians will be, let me say this about my view of governments. Satan's method of governing, and you see this in Isaiah, he wanted to rise up and take God's throne and rule over. He wanted to rule over. Jesus' method did not think equality with God was something to be grasped, but humbled himself all the way to the servant, all the way to the cross, giving his life to lift up others by his sacrifice. Jesus gives to lift up, Satan takes to exalt himself. Do you see the difference? Every human government in history, go and check every human government in history, has a few ruling elites rising up to tax and take advantage of and to empower them and to take from. Okay? The emperors of Japan and China, the pharaohs of Egypt, the kings in the nation states of Europe, and so forth and so on and so on. Okay? Until the United States of America. And when the United States of America came into existence, its founders wrote a constitution that was designed to break the power of the 3 elites that have historically exploited the masses. And the 3 elites that historically exploited the masses were the state itself, the power of the state, the church with their clerics of whatever religion, whatever state, country you're in, the church, and the aristocracy. The aristocracy were the landowners and the barons of industry. And so today in our society, and so our Constitution was written to break up the powers and give power to the people so we would not become serfs and pawns controlled by the big three, either the church or the state or the big industry. What's happening in America over the last few years is the big industry corporations are rising up and trying to basically do away with our constitutional protections and turn the masses of people into serving serfs again. And if you look for that dynamic, you can see it very clearly. But that was the principles of the Constitution, to restrain exploiting powers, to protect individual liberties, so that we could thrive to the greatest possibility in growing in God's grace in our life. Where Satan's goal is to use powers to exploit individuals to prevent individual development, using you as a battery or as a serf or a slave or something to advantage the elites. And we're seeing that happen and coming to fruition again in society today. So there you go. Let's close with prayer. Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you so much that yours is a kingdom of love, truth, and freedom, and that you have revealed the truth about who you are in Jesus, and that you have sent your Son to provide us salvation that we could never achieve in our own. We ask now that you will pour your Spirit upon us, taking the victories of Christ, reproducing them in us, enlightening our minds, transforming our characters, and making us effective at this time in history to be lights in this world, and protect us from getting drawn into the traps of the devil, so that we can be your people, settled and sealed, ready to see you when you come. We pray in your holy name. Amen.